Hi, everybody. This is Charles Hoskinson broadcasting live from warm, sunny Colorado. It's a lovely night. It's about 9:30 at night, and I figured I'd answer a few of your questions that you guys have been accumulating on Reddit. We have many different communication platforms: Twitter, Reddit, Telegram. We have lots of interactive events that we do, and it's nice to rotate between all of them. So anyway, let's go to Reddit and let's see what you guys have. Now, I have yet to look at Reddit today. So this is going to be fun. Let's see if we can find something interesting. And this is an experiment. Might turn out horribly wrong. Oh, this is an interesting one. Can we delete the old Dedalus wallet? Okay. So this is in a reference question to when you have an old copy of Dedalus and you have the new Dedalus, the Byron Reboot Dedalus that you've installed. So the answer to that question is it depends. So the first things first, ask yourself, do you have your keywords, your account recovery phrase, your wallet recovery phrase written down, your 12 keywords somewhere? And can you verify that you can restore your wallet from those 12 keywords? If the answer is yes, and you've done it, you've tested it, and you know for a fact it works, then the reality is you actually can erase any Dedalus wallet you want. You can get rid of Flight, get rid of the old wallet, get rid of the new wallet, because you always know that you can regenerate the wallet whenever you need to. So the safe thing to do would be to verify that your keywords still work, restore and recover your wallet, make sure you can spend from it, and everything looks fine. So that's the answer to that question. As long as you have your wallet recovery phrase, your account recovery phrase, whatever we ended up calling it, those 12 keywords, then yes, you can erase any wallet you so choose. Just be careful to verify that those words work. Do not assume because you wrote them down 2 years ago while drinking that they work. Please verify that they work and verify you can spend from the wallet prior to doing anything involving deletion and destruction of a wallet. You're unilaterally in charge of this. There's no way to recover if those keywords are bad. So that's the step there. Okay, so let's see the next question we got. There's a question about Phase 2 Ambassador Program and the purpose of the Ambassador Program in general and where we're going with the Ambassador Program. All right, so ambassadors are basically special community members who, through meritocratic means, have decided that they want to spend some amount of their time, either a little or a lot, basically representing the ecosystem Cardano. Now, in an ideal world, ambassadors would actually be selected through a voting process and funded via a blockchain process. So when Voltaire's out and all of our voting tools are deployed, ideally every single ambassador, if they have any special privileges or badges or representation, would basically be representatives of the ecosystem, and they would probably be elected on terms, and they probably would be compensated by some amount of inflation from the treasury. So that's where we'd like to go. Where we're currently at is the best vehicle to manage ambassadors is the Cardano Foundation. And they have to make the difficult choices of inclusion, and they have to make the difficult choices of basically how to manage that group of people. And it's really a try before you buy, and it's giving us a sense of how to run a program like this as an ecosystem and what our expectations as an ecosystem would be for ambassadors. And as the program evolves, eventually it'll become more decentralized. A great example would be the Cardano effect. Originally, IOHK funded that out of necessity. We just needed some sort of show to talk about Cardano, but we really didn't want to have any editorial control over content, and we didn't want to be able to, tell Rick or Philippe or anybody what to do on a day-to-day. So we simply subsidized it, but we stayed out of the actual day-to-day affairs. We created a firewall there. However, the very fact that we were funding it creates a slight conflict of interest or a perception of a conflict of interest. So then the Cardano Foundation took over the funding. So it was a nice transfer, and it allows some more degree of autonomy and independence. But still, then what if they never make critical content on the Cardano Foundation? Then, people would say, well, the only reason they're not criticizing is they're being paid by that. So ultimately, the best approach would be for that show to be funded by the blockchain itself. So similar to the ambassador program, it's going through kind of a series of broadening of funding to a point where eventually they work for all of you as opposed to any of us. And so they have complete and absolute monetary freedom, perceived or otherwise. It's a good question. Okay. Oh, this one is interesting. How will Plutus support refinement types? A year and a half ago, Charles said Plutus would support refinement types, but I haven't found anything in the language on the design or implementation. Will it be integrated into the language or piggyback on Liquid Haskell, or will we end up with something like Liquid Plutus? Yeah, so refinement types are kind of an interesting concept. So for those who don't know, a refinement type is basically just a type, which is kind of like a thing, like an integer or a natural number, something, and it's combined with a predicate. And the point of refinement types is to assist with the process of program verification. So you have some idea of how you'd like your program to behave, and then you need to verify that it's actually behaving that way. So in practice, you're looking at things like buffer overflows, division by zero, maps missing keys. Some cases you can show that perhaps the program's not terminating, in certain cases. So there's little things you're looking for. And the point of refinement types is to give you an explicit way of building more complexity into your description of how things should transform, data should transform, types should transform in your program, so that you're actually able to verify that the program is behaving correctly. Now, this by no means is the only tool in the verification tool bag. In fact, formal methods is a very rich and beautiful topic. And our own Philip Wadler actually wrote a great book talking about it in AGDA, and I'd highly recommend it because I believe the book is free. There's also a great book from Benjamin Pierce, which talks about software foundations, and that uses a language called COC, which goes into exhaustive detail on many of these techniques that are used for formal verification. Now, it's a good question of whether we will support this and how will we support this. Perhaps the biggest advocate of it was someone who worked for our company named Rebecca Valentine. And she and others, like Philip Kant, were quite interested in Liquid Haskell. And we actually did pursue talent from perhaps working with Ranjit to working with Nikki Vazoo and others to try to build an agenda where we could upgrade Haskell to support refinement types in a native capacity. This is a very involved affair, and there's still a lot of friction and sharp edges with the use of refinement types. And over time, we determined that we weren't getting a lot of productivity with the concept in our own development workflow. So the question remains, does it make sense to write Plutus programs with these added types? And would that add value to the construction of Plutus programs? And honestly, it could, but then you also have to look at other techniques like quick check and model checking. You have to also look at just how you would write specifications and how you would standardize and design smart contracts, and perhaps in a templated way. And you go from the specification to the actual program. So this is a slightly more involved story, and it doesn't seem that Plutus 1.0 will support any notion of refinement types where it's at. Because the primary advocates of that approach years ago have since left and gone on to other things. B, we've learned more about how to write good smart contracting languages. And in our view, it's probably more prudent to focus on verification of things like Marlowe, where you actually can get very clear-cut answers because of the nature of that DSL, where you actually can use a SAT solver and explicitly show that things are happening. Whereas when you have more feature-rich languages, it's a bit more difficult to do that. So it perhaps makes more sense to express desires using as simple of a DSL as possible. And then that gives you a much lower chance of having bugs in your program because the language just simply doesn't let you do as many things as a full-featured programming language would do. Yet you're still able to solve the majority of things that you care about. So for example, the modeling of the movement of money is a super important topic. And if you can keep that as simple, understandable, and verifiable as possible, then all those classes of bugs that can result in the loss of money, the locking of money, or the incorrect balance of money moving would be completely eliminated, or at least greatly reduced. And then, of course, you could have some edge cases, and you can deal with those where and when they make sense. But this would be a great thing to think about in a more holistic sense for Plutus 2. Something beyond 2020? So that's a very good question from Astral Emperor. All right. Now, this one's interesting. Fundamental research about Cardano. Yeah, I did see this. This one was actually sent to me through a different channel, and I clicked through to actually comment directly on the thread. So basically, this website, CoinDecide, I've never seen it before. It's got a decent layout. When you click on Cardano on CoinDecide, basically they say that we have not launched our mainnet, and apparently they believe that we are some form of ERC20 token. I have no idea how anybody who professes to be providing credible information and researching about tokens can fuck up that badly. But seriously, this calls into question pretty much every single thing about this entire due diligence platform. Everything is just wrong, absolutely wrong. Zero value transactions. Okay, we're not quantum resistant at the moment. I mean, this is just really shoddy research. And it calls into question, and it actually brings up a broader point about the industry as a whole and our ability as an industry to create accurate information about cryptocurrency projects. There are some ratings agencies that seem to have technical people and provide some degree of credibility in their ability to understand a cryptocurrency. For example, Weiss. Say what you will about them as an organization. Weiss has been consistent in their desire to attempt to understand our industry. And sometimes they say things that aren't completely accurate, but at least you can communicate with them and you know that there's professionals behind that organization, and they are attempting to try to rhyme and reason in some quantitative way, rating a cryptocurrency. And that's a very difficult topic. But every now and then we see these websites pop up like CoinDecide. And I'm sorry, if you think Cardano is an ERC20 token or we haven't launched our mainnet, you deserve to lose your job. You're just incompetent, absolutely incompetent. 5 minutes of basic research would tell you otherwise. Simply downloading the Dedalus wallet would tell you otherwise. It's just very obvious that we didn't go down that route. And we are in mainnet. And before you say, well, you have federated consensus, then that by that same logic, Ripple would not have launched their mainnet yet. So is Ripple not a cryptocurrency? Is the number 3 market cap cryptocurrency with a multi-billion-dollar company behind it and hundreds of thousands of users, and it's been around for years? That's not a mainnet? Okay. Federated consensus does not necessarily mean that you're not a cryptocurrency. You certainly can be. It just means we haven't decentralized everything yet. It's running in a static and federated mode, just like Ripple is. And in a very short period of time, it will be a fully decentralized system. Again, this does not mean that we're launching a mainnet. The mainnet launched in September of 2017. If we were so lucky to be RC20, we would have been able to get Shelly out a lot faster because we wouldn't have had to worry at all about backwards compatibility. So this is just completely wrong. So don't pay attention to these websites. They shame themselves. CoinDecide, you're a very shameful website. Okay, Charles, when will becoming a stake pool operator be so simple that even idiots can do it? Something along the lines of download a pack, install it, a couple more clicks and keyboard strokes, and bam, you're operating a pool. Isn't it our best interest to have people who have no idea what they're doing, basically running critical pieces of infrastructure in Cardano? The entire point of segregation of people by speciality is that there is a reward for merit. There's a reward for people actually having enough basic knowledge, not only to turn something on, but to also understand the error messages when it doesn't turn on, or to have to reconfigure it for different environments or to optimize it. And frankly, we have seen many people on the incentivized testnet demonstrate this competency to the extent where they've even modified source code themselves to get their nodes working just the way that they want or to optimize things that they want. So there's absolutely no reason to have a race to the bottom and try to idiot-proof running a stake pool. It is important to make it understandable. It's important to have a rich user experience. It's important to have very accurate, comprehensive documentation. But let's be clear, this is a competitive business. And people have to make economic decisions of who do they trust to run a stake pool and stake their money for them. Because at the end of the day, it's competitive. And if pool A wins or pool B wins, if B doesn't win because of a misconfiguration, everybody who's delegated to B loses in that. This is one of the reasons why this proof of stake model is something that rewards quality and professionalism and competence, because you always want your people to make the block right, to have the right configuration, to provide as many services as possible. So not only is it a race for lots of stake pools up to that saturation point, that parameter, but it's also a race for competency. So even if we made it a simple user experience, you would be drowned out very rapidly by others. But that's no excuse to be elitist. If people really do want to try it, then we need and have a moral obligation to provide comprehensive documentation that over time, if someone who's willing to invest the time to understand it, they would be able to compete and run things. So it's a balance between simplicity and reality. And I don't think it's as simple as just make it click and you're done and hope everything runs. That's the experience you should expect from a cell phone application for voting. That's the experience you should expect for running a normal wallet. That is not the experience you should expect for power users in the system, like developers, asset issuers, or stake pool operators. Those are the special people. Transaction fees after Shelley has launched. Hey, hello guys. When will Shelley be active and running? How much will it cost per one transaction? Love this project. Cardano will hopefully unite the planet a little more. I hope so too, the Woken God. Okay. So this is another one of those things where we can do better. So basically what you do is you set some sort of transaction cost in Dedalus and other wallets, and you say, okay, pool operators should accept this, and by default, they'll accept the minimum value. And then over time, you can lower that minimum value as ADA appreciates in price. But it would be nice to have an elastic system. It'd be nice to have a system where ADA is somewhat aware of its own price, and then it can consistently keep the transaction fees at a fairly low level, depending upon how the network is being used, and also capacity of the network. So if the network is underutilized, fees will go down. If the network is overutilized, fees dynamically go up. And this is done somehow automatically or through a market-driven mechanism. It's a great area of research, and it's something that we really wanted to look into and spend some time with, but we never got around to it because there was just so many other things to think about. So in the next contract, beyond 2020, we'd love to actually write several papers on this topic and come up with a much better way of doing it. In the meantime, we'll set the initial parameter, and then with Voltaire, the parameter can be user updatable, meaning that it can be updated through the update system. And then what happens is regularly the network can vote on raising or lowering transaction fees, much like the Federal Reserve votes on raising interest rates and lowering interest rates and these types of things. It's just a little bit more user dynamicism. So that's probably a nice intermediate step. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Help, please. Dedalus wallet sync issue on OS X. Yes, we've got numerous reports that some people are having some issues where sync is taking not only a long time, but a lot of CPU utilization on certain versions of OS X. This is a known issue, and the developers are investigating it. We'll probably kick it out with the next release of Dedalus or the following release of Dedalus. It's not a universal issue on OS X, but it is something that we see. It was surprising to see it because the developers use OS X mostly for their development environment. So so usually that's the platform that has the least bugs because they're the most noticed. And we're not sure why that's been creeping up, but we'll have a solution for it soon. And it's a mild inconvenience, but it's nothing significant. When you see heavy CPU utilization with this new code, almost always that's because we're overlogging or we're having some sort of conflict with the operating system where the program is doing something that's causing the OS to work harder than necessary. And generally speaking, just simple things can correct that. So that's a 1 or 2 week development cycle. Not always, but that's what we've noticed going through the Byron reboot code. It's very easy to debug and very easy to fix these things. First Shelley block. Video and article. No, we have not had the first Shelley block. We've had the first self-node Shelley block for Haskell. And what's nice is that's rapidly turning into the Friends and Family testnet, which will be the first Friends and Family Shelley block. And that'll rapidly turn into the first Shelley block on the testnet for everybody, for stake pool operators and power users. So people are comfortable with the command line. And of course, that block is not connected to the Byron history. It's just strictly Shelley. And the point is to get everything set up and get people used to the software. When the balance check happens, you could argue that that is probably the first Shelley-ish block because that's the unbroken history since September of 2017 all the way through to whenever we launched the balance check. And really the difference between the balance check testnet and the mainnet will be very small. there'll be a few things here and there. And it just gives us a chance to do some final editing and changes to make sure that everything's looking right. So we're not quite at the first Shelley block, but you know what? We're getting to a point where that's a reality, and it's a certainty, and it's going to happen very soon. Soon as in soon, not 6 months from now, but much, much sooner than that. And if anybody says otherwise, you just tell them to go pound sand. You really do. I'm getting real tired of these trolls. I mean, honestly, it's just old. Fine, get a life, grow up. Honestly, grow up. You're going to look so incredibly stupid when the Haskell testnet launches, and then shortly thereafter the balance check launches, and then Shelley launches. I mean, and then of course the dialogue will change. Well, where are the real life use cases? Just grow up. Find some other project to go and troll. You're nobodies. So I don't worry about that. All right, let's take a look here. Of course, we have the obligatory Cardano on Coinbase question. Guys are pretty excited about that. I would be too. We love exchanges. We love liquidity. Binance is currently right in the middle of a big upgrade. They're updating the Byron reboot, and they're having a lot of fun going through the documentation and learning how to use that. And it's been very educational for us because any holes or deficiencies in the documentation, they're, of course, going to remind us that those are deficiencies so we can fix them for future people. So we're quite happy with how that's coming along. And it's trailblazing for all exchanges, basically a much better listing experience for everybody. So I think that's a cool thing. Bullish versus bearish, the CEO's approach. Well, let's look at this one. Oh, they call me the Hoskinator. And they say the Ripple CEO is Ned Flanders. Yeah, actually, let's talk about how CEOs are supposed to behave, especially if they want to be publicly traded companies. So today, something happened with Elon Musk. We don't know. I looked at his Twitter feed, and either Elon's been drinking, he's been taking some drugs, or his Twitter feed's been hacked, or he's just damn near lost it. You generally, as the CEO of a publicly traded company, who's led multiple publicly traded companies, PayPal and Tesla, you don't tweet that your stock is overpriced. There's a firewall between the CEO and the markets of your shares. And there's an expectation, both legal and social, by the regulators of every regulated market that's credible, that CEOs are supposed to behave in a certain way. And they are supposed to be very careful with the statements that they make. Now, there's a big spectrum of flexibility there. You, in many cases, have super conservative CEOs who are super careful with what they say, like the Bob Igers of the world, or Tim Cooks. They're not really going to go out there and say crazy shit. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have the Elon Musks, in some cases the Jack Welches. You have these CEOs who are, or Mark Cuban, who are very vocal, and they just have strong opinions about things that they share. And I'd like to consider myself in that set as well. I say things from my heart. I just say, hey guys, I'm going with my gut on this one, or this is what I believe and feel. And I don't go through a marketing department. I don't go through a communications department. I know a lot of Fortune 500 CEOs, and generally speaking, how they make statements is, on social media in particular, they don't even write their own tweets. They don't write any of their external communications. Basically, first, generally, it's some third party that writes everything. And in many cases, CEO doesn't even see it. He just basically gives consent to his chief of staff or executive assistant or somebody who knows him pretty well, will review those statements and say, yeah, they look in line with our philosophy. Just send them out. So when you see a tweet or something from a CEO, it's been sanitized to a point where it's asinine. And even when a CEO does do something, generally what they do is when they do it, they write it and they send it to their PR people, their brand people, their external people. They read it, clean it up, then they focus group it. Will this piss off this interest group? Will Aborigines with this political ideology and and this sexual preference get angry at us if we say this. I mean, this is how crazy it gets. Is it PC? Is it not? And they sometimes argue for hours over the meaning of a particular word or how a sentence will read or something like that. It's extraordinary when you actually see this machinery up close and you see how it works and how people do these jobs. So those CEOs do this because they don't want to be seen as influencing the stock price. They don't want to create a controversy. At the end of the day, the story should be about the company, its goals, its vision, the products, the things it's doing. Generally speaking, especially with custodial CEOs, the story is not about the leader. It's not about the CEO. If the story is about the CEO, Tim Cook is doing his job poorly. Now, the founder CEO and the more aggressive CEOs, sometimes the story being about the CEO is actually quite advantageous to the company because people invest in the company or they buy the products of the company because they actually identify with the culture, philosophy, and vision of the particular leader of the firm. So this is where sanitizing is problematic because the minute you try to corporatize that person, you're effectively killing the reason why people identify with that brand. Frankly, this is what made Apple. Steve Jobs was a master storyteller. And what he did is he created a culture around Apple and said, hey, Apple, if you buy an Apple product, you're this kind of person. You agree with these types of things. You basically think different. It was their tagline for a long time. It would have been unimaginable to put Steve Jobs at that point in a suit and forced him to start speaking in corporate doublespeak and never commit to everything and just be vacuous and hollow. Everything that was Apple would die and be lost, and people said it's not our company anymore. And then suddenly the company would make no money. Why? Because they could no longer charge a 30 to 40% premium on the hardware that's identical to the hardware of their competitors. But it's just in a pretty box with a nice culture on it. It's the same for designer brands. If you look at Armani or any of these other extremely expensive brands, that they carry with them unique cultures and vision and viewpoint. And you can't just simply sanitize that because the very fact that it's unsanitized and real and legitimate is what gives that brand value. The danger of this, though, is that you live and die by the quality of the CEO, and you live and die by whether your CEO or whoever you've built this brand around stays a credible actor. For example, Papa John's Pizza. He's the founder of Papa John's, the face of Papa John's, apparently ran into some issues, and the company kicked him out. And now they're in this weird situation where the guy that basically created the company, was the face of the company, is gone. And they have to completely rebrand themselves, to completely rebuild themselves. The Papa John's is gone. To a lesser extent, McAfee antivirus. They have the situation where the actual McAfee has behaved in ways that some people would consider to be a madman. And certainly it's created a lot of chaos. And so when you carry the name of your founder and your founder's gone off the deep end, or at least people have perceived that, then it creates a little bit of concern of whether it actually helps or hinders the company's mission and its ability to execute. So Elon Musk recently said a lot of crazy tweets. I hope his account was hacked. If not, it's pretty clear that Musk is having a very serious time. His child is just about to be born. He's going through a very stressful period. Human beings are about to be launched into space for the first time in 9 years on an American rocket that his company has built. I can't imagine the level of stress that this guy is under, especially given that all of his production capacity is grinded to a halt as a consequence of a quarantine that he feels is fascist. So even if he hasn't gone crazy, the stress certainly is impacting his judgment. And just a simple tweet of saying the stock is overvalued has Tesla stock, I think, collapsed 10% just on that movement. So this is a problem. But, at the end of the day, I think we've lived in an age where it's becoming less about what you say and more about your character and what you do and how you act. Would you rather a CEO always behave perfectly, say the perfect things, and then on the back end, insider trade against you whenever he or she knows that the stock is not going to behave, or basically try to sell you products that they know are defective or harmful? And the reality is that for Fortune 1000 companies, that's all too common. We have a lot of Elizabeth Holmes out there. And just the ones we found are pretty concerning. And we all pretend like that was the exception to the rule. But frankly, there's a lot of predatory culture in many boardrooms across the United States. In my view, it's much more important to have a CEO who doesn't always say the right thing, but their heart is in the right place, and you have a personal relationship with them in that their word is their bond, and they know what the hell they're doing. And you understand that they're a calm leader who can navigate rough waters. I often say to my people that at the end of the day, a CEO only has 3 responsibilities in a company. The first responsibility is sustainable revenue. Stock markets don't reward that. In many cases, CEOs have to make a decision. Do I do something now that will flatline our revenue, but long-term make us very competitive in 5 or 10 years? Or do I do something now that will spike my revenue, but burn the company out or not make us competitive in 5 or 10 years? But then again, Wall Street will reward me for great quarterly profits. So I'll be punished for doing the right thing, but then I'll be rewarded for doing a perverse thing. That's a bad incentive. So a lot of CEOs, they just simply don't behave appropriately. So sustainable revenue is the first duty. It's the single most important duty because if you don't do it, the company eventually goes under. Second, dealing with existential risk. So there's plenty of risk in a company, and there's plenty of people who wake up every day dealing with it. When you call in the CEO, greatest movie example of this would be Margin Call, where these traders discover that 2008 is going to happen. The whole markets are going to collapse. Once people confirm that this is indeed going to happen, the first person they call is the CEO. He flies in on a helicopter and says, okay, what's going on? And then they all come up with a plan in a few hours to save the company. That's an existential risk. And there's many of them. And CEOs are always brought in to deal with that. And most CEOs who are good do those first 2 things well, and we reward them accordingly. The third thing is the Walt Disney effect. And people always get this one wrong: picking a proper successor. Every CEO has a duty to make sure that they have somebody around that if they get hit by a bus or decide they just don't want to do the job anymore, can take over for them and run the company as well or better than they could and carry on the vision of the organization. Disney did not do this. And to a lesser extent, Bill Gates did not do this. This is why Microsoft entered the Ballmer era. Ballmer was just a proxy of Gates and allowed him to enable his wildest fantasies while he ran off trying to save the world. Meanwhile, Microsoft year by year lost its dominance and competitiveness to an extent where the shareholders revolted, fired both Gates and Ballmer, and brought in Satya Nadella. It was a really tragic thing for him, but it was necessary for the company, and Nadella had to right the entire ship. So those are the 3 things a CEO has to do. And they have to do that in a regulated environment more often than not. And they have to do that where every word they say is going to be judged and monitored. And then they have to do that within the brand reality of the company. And they have to do that with varying degrees of mandates and power. Some CEOs are incredibly powerful, like Mark Zuckerberg. Other CEOs are not so powerful, like the CEO of HP. They have power, but there's certainly a strong board, and there are certainly activist shareholders, and there's a lot of institutional momentum in various ways. So you come in as a custodian, and your goal is to do no harm and manage the ship as well as you can, but you don't really have a lot of opportunity to carve your own name and initials into the system. So you have more freedom to say things. And, the reality is that the guys at Ripple, they don't have as much freedom as I do. Getting to the point of this question, I am the guy at Input Output, for better or for worse, and I'm accountable to basically the success of this project. And I have a personal relationship with my community, and they sometimes give me a lot of slack to hang myself, a lot of rope to either hang myself or climb a mountain with. And some days I do put my foot in my mouth, but I'd like to believe that we all know that we're on the same side here. When you come in as the CEO of Ripple, especially at this stage in the company's evolution, the reality is Ripple has 2 things that they're attempting to do. One, make sure XRP is not a security and stabilize their business model. 2, conduct an IPO. If the CEO accomplishes that, he's going to be lavishly rewarded and make tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars over the next 5 years, get to be on the front cover of Forbes, gets all the accolades. And that's the definition of success there. It is not to be a crypto evangelist. It's not to go on Reddit or make these AMAs and tell people how we're going to go change the world. I'm a founder CEO. I started this company on a vision. I started this project on a vision. I'm going to keep doing this whether I'm rich or poor. If I've spent all my money and we still haven't achieved the vision, then I'll just keep doing it because this is how I'd like to spend my life. I didn't sign up to go have a really nice job, make a lot of money, and then go retire and then, have grandkids sit on my lap and talk about how rich granddad is and, pay to get my kids into Harvard. I signed up to build stuff and change things and make things better and make things beautiful. I signed up because I've seen a lot of horrible things in the world. I've been to over 52 countries and some really bad ones like Sierra Leone, where the people are great, but the government sucks and they're laden with war and chaos, in some cases, even Ebola. Not a good situation. And I've seen the best in people. I've seen forgiveness you wouldn't imagine. In Rwanda, I saw a Tutsi and a Hutu person who ate lunch together every day, who worked at the Genocide Museum, and the Hutu person killed the Tutsi person's family. I can't imagine eating lunch with someone that killed my family. But do that and call that person at least an acquaintance and understand them and where they came from in just 20 years. I've seen these things with my own eyes. And I say the world deserves better systems. The world deserves to be better. So this is why we don't run a company like Ripple. And this is why I do the things I do on a Friday night, go out live with you guys on YouTube and have a conversation with you, for better or for worse. And y'all rib me and we have a great conversation. Sometimes it's productive, sometimes it's not. I'm not going away. I'm going to keep being here, keep doing this. As long as I have a stage to stand on, I'll keep telling you the merits of what we do. And if we get it right, we change the world. If we don't get it right, we inspire somebody in our community to do it again and change the world. A great example of that would be 1964 with the Barry Goldwater campaign in the United States. Many of you will not even know who Barry Goldwater was. He ran for president and won the Republican nomination in 1964 and ran against Lyndon Baines Johnson. And what he's usually known for in politics is being crushed in a landslide against Lyndon Baines Johnson. People thought he was a bit of a crazy person. But he inspired at least one person during his run to really take politics so seriously that that person went on to be governor of California. And then that person went on to become the president of the United States. And that was Ronald Reagan. So the point of movements in philosophy is that the definition of success is to keep the torch lit, the idea alive, to keep the momentum going, the mission going. As Martin Luther King said, in the journey to the promised land, I might not get there with you, but we as a people will get there. And similarly, we as a movement will get there. And at the end of the day, because our goals are pure and our vision is pure and where we'd like to go is pure, we'll get there. Because who can debate with this and fight with us? Is it a bad idea to give each person in the world more control over their money, their financial freedom, to make sure that they can't become victims of waste, fraud, and abuse, corruption, unlawful government seizing of their assets? Is it debatable that people should have the certainty that when they vote, they know that their vote was properly recorded and there won't be retribution against them for voting the wrong way against a particular political party, and to know that they will always have the right to vote? Is it so wrong to know that when you own something that your property rights are going to be protected and they're transnational, and even if your country falls into a civil war, at least the world knows who really owns something? Is it so wrong to ask that you're treated with transparency and honesty in your commercial dealings? These, of course, are undebatable principles, and the point of our industry is creating tools to make these things and more things better for everybody. And we live in an age now where in the United States, military drones are being used to tell people to go back into their homes for quarantine. Governors have completely suspended the U.S. Constitution for our safety. We haven't seen something like this since the Civil War in 1861. It's an unprecedented time. And we tend to wonder when there's not a lot of focus on the facts and circumstances of what led us into this, if it will ever actually completely end, or if these enumerated powers that have been expanded dramatically in the last few weeks will start sticking around longer than they should. Vladimir Lenin had a great saying, sometimes decades go by and very little things happen. And sometimes in weeks, decades of stuff happens, to paraphrase him. And he's absolutely right. For a long time, since September 11th, America was on kind of a direction, and the world was in kind of a direction, but there was pushback, and people got comfortable with the flow. And in just a few short months, everything about our relationship with our government, our relationship with each other, our relationship with markets, how free markets should work, who should get to decide, they've all been called into question, and we've seen a hyper-centralization of power off of the excuse that it's saving lives. And of course, what happens if we don't have a vaccine? Very high probability of that if the virus continues to mutate. There's already 30 different strains of coronavirus. So if we can't get an effective vaccine, does that mean this is now an indefinite reality that we all live in, saying that we're here to save lives for your protection? So the point of the tools that we construct as an industry is that they are the antidote to tyranny. Because if the argument is that we want to save lives, we now have a way of doing that without requiring hyper-centralization of power around politicians, in many cases, who don't even follow the rules that they enforce. For example, the governor of Illinois wants to put his whole state in a lockdown and tell everybody they have to shelter in place, but his wife can go to the beach and go travel to Florida and have fun. And when you question him about it, he says, "How dare you bring my family into this?" It's a very simple matter. The rules don't apply to the people who rule us. Some people are more equal than others, and that's always been true throughout all of human history. So that's what our movement is about, and that's what I do as a CEO, is that I, from the bully pulpit and from the product line, every single day go and remind people that the products that we build as a company, the things we think about as a company, are all about philosophy, and ultimately are all about building new tools for the 21st century to better manage people throughout the years that come. Ripple's not that kind of company. They don't have that philosophy. They don't think this way. Their goal is to build the internet of value. And their goal is to make the existing system far more efficient and to create a better product for people like banks and governments and enterprise actors. And yes, this will carry a lot of consumer benefit. But at the end of the day, if a regulator comes in and tells them to substantially change the soul of their protocol and product, they'll just simply do it. If a regulator comes in and tells us to substantially change the soul of what we're building, I will resign as CEO of Input Output and alert everybody and warn everybody that this mandate has been given to us. And hopefully we can find a way that somebody in a different jurisdiction can continue the work. Because there's just simply things I'm just not going to do. And I really don't care about money. I've been rich and poor. It doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is the things that we do. So yeah, chill as fuck. No worries. Shelling incoming. Thanks for the question there, Crypto Deus. That was a good one. But actually, I like the Ripple guys. I think they sometimes do very questionable things, like put Ben Losky on their board. But I like David Schwartz, and I've liked Evan Thomas and all the other guys. The Interledger Standard's a good thing, and they write good code, and they have good technology, and I love that they try to open source and share things where and when they're possible. Frankly, when you understand that our differences are values as opposed to differences of personality or character, then it's much easier to collaborate with them and others like that where and when it makes sense. But you never compromise your values, because once you do that, you lose everything. There's no point to follow this. Isn't it a funny thing that we went from nothing with Bitcoin, January 3rd of 2009. Nobody cared about us, nothing. There was literally just a single person. And we grew to a colossal movement where a guy in Mongolia who raises camels can own Bitcoin. And that was all done based upon principles and values. And now we have people entering our industry saying, yeah, well, that worked then, but it's not going to work anymore. You have to now completely cave in and say, yes, sir, to the man. It's patronizing. It's an amazing statement. And everybody who carries that opinion They just don't get who we are and why we're here. This is about the people that come after us, not us. I see this question a lot. Lost spending password, or when the wallet migration comes by, what happens with that spending password? So, spending password is basically an encryption of your private keys, of your cryptographic assets in the wallet. So, that's a local thing. It has nothing to do with your wallet recovery phrase. So, when you recover a wallet, you recover the wallet naked. No encryption is recovered with that. Now, when you add a spending password, you're re encrypting the private key. The point of a spending password is it protects you against a multi-user computer attack. So you have a laptop, you have a roommate, you leave your laptop on, and then somebody, turns your laptop on, maybe the roommate's friend or whatever, and because it's an unshielded wallet, they can just spend it right there. And I actually witnessed this happen during the founding of Ethereum in January of 2014. It's a great story. I was staying at a beach house with a bunch of other people, and we had one guy who was creating ATMs at the time, and he had a Bitcoin wallet, and he had several Bitcoin in it. And it was either an exchange wallet or a local wallet. I can't remember which one. And he fell asleep. And that morning after, when we woke up, one of the people came to me and told me that somebody had basically turned his laptop on and used his wallet and sent several Bitcoin out of it. So basically, we had a mystery, a whodunit. And so I sat down with everybody and we kind of traced out who'd been in the house. We created a timeline, and we were deductively able to actually break it down to two candidates. And one was preposterous. And so the other one happened to be a friend of this guy's who was just staying there for the night. And it turned out it was him. So I never found out if he ever got his Bitcoin back or not, but at least we discovered who it was. Point is, if he had his spending password, that wouldn't have happened. Because even if the person could have broken into the wallet, when they tried to initiate the transaction, they couldn't decrypt the private key to spend the funds. That's the point of spending passwords, is they protect you against that particular type of attack. Now, people get confused because they say, well, hang on a second, people can see the balance, so that must mean it's not secure. No, it just means that the public side is transparent, but they actually spend the balance. The key is inaccessible as long as the spending password is reasonably strong. And the standards we have for Dedalus, I think it's 10 characters with a mixture of things. So it's a reasonably strong password. However, that spending password does not follow the recovery process, because when you recover, you're rebuilding all of the credentials from ground up. So they come out naked. You have to put clothes on them. You have to put a spending password on them. All right, let's take a look at some of your questions we have in the live stream. Okay. Seems like Aparna was a great hire. Things seem more mature now and organized now. Absolutely. I love Aparna. One of the privileges of working in IOHK is we have really strong female leadership. I felt that was really important, not to be patronizing or a quota guy or any of these SJW idiots. But the reality is that if you're going to build something for everybody, you need to hire everybody. You can't just hire one type of person and expect them to be able to figure out how the world works. And different people have different core competencies. And you can't take a bunch of hyper-masculine academic dudes and put them in a room and expect them to build a great product. It gets a little crazy. This thinking gets a little biased. You get a little group thinky, and you just start trying to solve every problem one particular way. So you invite diversity in your organization. And by doing that, you start looking at things in very different ways, in very creative ways. And diversity is along many axes. There's cultural, linguistic. There are so many languages that are spoken at IOHK. We have people from 20 different countries. So they look at things from their own localities. When we talk about problems of Africa, it's not Charles Hoskinson, the white guy born in Hawaii, that's thinking about the problems of Ethiopia. It's the Ethiopian programmers that we trained in Addis Ababa, who live there their entire life, born there, speak all the local languages, who are basically giving us domain expertise, why these problems exist and the cultural realities behind them. Similarly, along gender lines, it's a preposterous assumption that we're going to rebuild the world social operating system, financial operating system, and exclude women from that. It's a crazy idea. You need to have some representation on all sides. And what you do is you look for great leaders. The reality is, if you want to hire a great woman, you'll find one. If you're looking, you'll find one who is incredibly qualified and can bring elements and dynamicism to the organization that just aren't there otherwise. And I am so incredibly lucky to have great leaders like Tamara and Aparna in my organization. And they hold their own against some of these incredibly bright, very opinionated engineers. So it really shows. And it's a very different organization today than it was even 6 months ago as a consequence of their contributions. So thank them so much. And I really enjoy having them around. Pool operators are unable to make critical business decisions without knowing what pledge is or how it works. Will the mechanics of pledge be apparent during the Haskell testnet? Yes, that's actually one of the points of both the friends and family testnet and the point of the first Haskell testnet is to lock those types of things down and have the definitive conversation on not only pledge, but the K parameter and other things in the system. You'll notice that one of the guys who made a video about pledges, Rick, he's one of the pioneers. So he's been invited to the Friends and Family testnet. And he's your mole on the inside that will definitely provide ample information and opinion about these things. And there's going to be definitely a community pushback there. And I've instructed all of the engineers to take the concerns of the community as first-class citizens. So even if we have our own ideas, we have to look at the community ideas in equal value to our own ideas. And eventually a decision will be made. So how we will communicate that where we're at is first on a Cardano effect episode with Philip Kant, Kevin Hammond, and Duncan coming in and explaining what is the K parameter and what is the pledge parameter and what did we learn from the incentivized testnet and our conversations with the friends and family testnet and where we're going with the Shelley Haskell testnet. And then the final decision will be made before the balance check of how to set those parameters. Not everybody's going to be happy about it. Somebody's going to have a strong opinion about it. And, you just one of those least worst things that you have to go with. You have to pick something that's best for the majority of people and that we think will lead to a stable system. The good news is it can be changed, and it can be changed through the same thing that can change the transaction fees, the K parameter, or other parameters in the system, Voltaire. So if we get it wrong, you won't have to live with it forever. But you have to start somewhere, and wherever you start, it's going to piss somebody off. The same with the token supply. People often ask, where did 45 billion come from? It was a number, and there were some mechanics behind it, but there's no empirical, super awesome economic model behind this anymore. There's any model behind how many Bitcoin there are. You pick something at the end of the day, and you live with it, and then people accept it, understand it, and then build that around their understanding of the system. And then markets do the rest. But it's impossible to argue that 44 billion would have been better than 46 billion. You just can't. These are numbers. And you can even move decimal points. We have 6 after the decimal zeros, whereas Bitcoin has 8. So, Bitcoin looks smaller, but to a certain respect, it's just because of where we've put the decimal point. We're a little bit more when you actually correct that. So it's just it's one of those things. Once the D parameter goes to 0, is the network 100% decentralized controller, or can IOHK or another actor jump in and change? Once it hits 0, we're going to wreck the ability to modify it at that point. So in the short term, we'll just erase the keys that give us the ability to update that if we can. And in the longer term, that parameter will entirely be removed with a hard fork. So there's no intention once we hit 0 to ever again reinstall the training wheels. Once your kid knows how to ride a bicycle, you just have to accept they're going to fall off the bicycle and scrape their elbow. But that's no excuse for putting the training wheels back on after they do it. Y'all have to just accept it. So I think this is the most reasonable way to go from a static and federated system to a dynamic and decentralized system. But at some point, y'all have to learn how to fly. And you're going to fly pretty fast, even if you fall out of the tree a few times. Charles, how is Cardano more decentralized than Bitcoin? How is that possible? The Bitcoin people are some of the worst in understanding the concepts of decentralization sometimes. They get philosophy pretty right, and they certainly have principles. But when you actually want to have a reasonable, realistic, fact-based conversation about decentralization, they have none of it. So you can look at parameters like the amount of full nodes in the system. That's like your ability to regenerate the system in the event that the system is in some way hit or compromised. It also reinforces a core principle of cryptocurrencies, which is inclusive accountability. Basically, we all check each other's work. Okay, so that's the concept of these validators. They look at things, they validate things. We know the system is right. Then there's consensus participation, and that's basically who gets to update the system. So whole point of these systems is you do transactions. And as you do transactions, they all get collected in a pending, some cloud out in the sky, pending your mempool. They're just sitting there. And you got to process them, update the system. Well, somebody has to do that. Now, you can have a static and federated system where the same people over and over do that. Or you can have a dynamic system where different people do that. And a decentralized system where different people do that, and it's unpredictable who those people are. Now, Bitcoin, you don't have a lot of unpredictability there. The same miners tend to win again and again because they're professional operations, and there's only a small collection of pools. I've seen some people cite less than 10 major operations control more than 50% of the system. So you do have a dynamic system where you certainly could have new actors come and go. There's no restriction, hard restriction on it, but it's not quite decentralized. It's federated. Okay, so it's dynamic but federated. Whereas what we're doing is we're going to a completely decentralized system, and there's already good indication there's going to be hundreds of distinct actors in the beginning who are making blocks. So I think we have somewhere like 19,000 nodes in the Jormungandr, which are all by definition full nodes because they carry the whole thing. So if we move those over, we're actually having a pretty high node count, and we're going to have many more consensus nodes by a factor of 10 to 100 over Bitcoin at the beginning. And our system does not slow down or lose performance appreciably if we were to increase that parameter substantively. So it's foreseeable in future versions of Ouroboros, as Cardano grows, to have 10,000 or 100,000 stake pools, given updates to the way we do the networking and a few protocol parameters. But these are inevitabilities. They will eventually happen. And we can force that along with parameterizations and competition, and geographic drift of ADA will create that because people will tend to delegate to people in their backyard. And so, African holders will delegate to African pools and so forth. It's just because they know these people, they have business relationships with them, or perhaps there's legal requirements, whatever have you. So over time, the system gets more decentralized. So we win the validation set because it's going to be easier and easier on our side, the way we design things, to run a full node. Eventually, with future technology, much easier than anything Bitcoin could ever do with their snail-paced development. And we already, out of the gate, have crushed Bitcoin in terms of the amount of consensus participants. And so we're much more decentralized in that respect. Finally, you have concept of code participation. The whole notion of a treasury is you create a much more egalitarian, decentralized, and fair participation process for the direction of the system than a beneficent meritocratic system where you have core developers and it's not clear who gets to be one. It's very difficult to participate there. I'm not allowed to. A lot of people aren't. And they say, oh, yeah, sure, write a bunch of code. It's like, okay, I can spend 2 years of my life begging and pleading, and then I can be welcomed as one of the lesser vassals of this system. So no, it's not decentralized at all. Of course, I'll be burnt at the stake by the Bitcoin wizards and these other people, and they'll say Charles is lying to you. Well, guys, that ship has sailed. You have your opinion, I have my opinion. We're just going to, at this point, agree to disagree. So I think very firmly that we are much more decentralized, and there's very empirical ways you can look at this, from the amount of validating nodes to the amount of consensus participants to how you handle source management and decisions to fork. And we have tools for all of those things. Will many other crypto projects be able to build on top of Cardano's blockchain? That is the hope with Plutus. What's up, Mr. Hoskinson? Nothing much. Who controls the private keys of the Treasury wallet? What checks and balances are there? So the basic idea of the long-term Treasury wallet is it's controlled by the blockchain itself, meaning that funds are basically managed by some mechanism where no party controls private keys. You basically build the spending predicate from an action of a vote. Now, as we add Voltaire into the system, so post 2020, it is a prerequisite that 100% of value management has to be done by the chain itself. And it can be built as a DAO, or it can be built directly into the ledger rules. There's a litany of approaches that we could have, and we'll err on the side of correctness, but at the same time, we'll err on the side of fastest to market so that we can get this system out there, because you can always change it after you have it, especially once you have a functioning voting system. And I think you guys are going to be very pleasantly surprised with our progress on Voltaire. No one believes me because, guys are assholes, some of you. But we actually, I'm not making it up. We are making blinding progress on this project. And, just because it's at the linear end of the map, what happens if we put them together in a circle? Then Voltaire touches Byron. They're right next to each other, right? So look at things differently. Think of things differently. You can work in things in parallel. Nothing happens linearly with these types of projects. So I think you're all going to be surprised with what we have. And that's going to decentralize very, very rapidly for the greater good of the community, because it's an economic necessity for long-term participation. And not all of you are assholes, just some of you. ADA just goes down, though. It's funny. It's like we go up 45% in a month and it goes down. Fuck you. Come on, you idiot. This is the greatest part about these profiteering kids. They never understand why we're here and what we're doing. And then when you get good news and we're actually performing well and we decorrelate from Tezos and Bitcoin, that's ignored. And then we have a little bit of pullback because people sell off. Guys, there are great people collect statistics of how many addresses are in the money and how many addresses are out of the money. So currently, more than 55% of the addresses in the network are out of the money, meaning that they're in the red. And 55%, 45%, I believe, are in the money. There's about 350,000 unique ADA addresses if you actually do the analytics and look at it. So that means that as we go up, some of those people that were in the red have turned to the green. Because they're now in the green, will divest because they want to exit the position because they've had a historic loser and they want to rebalance their portfolios. So you create resistance levels at every single price point. So when you go up, it gets pushed back down. Every cryptocurrency suffers from this, and people measure this as part of their trading models. You can build unlimited levels of sophistication if you want to basically predict these types of things. So, it's like if your goal is just when is it going to go up 5 cents or 10 cents, get out of this space. This is not for you. This is the time for that is over. Everybody got lucky. And now we're in the fundamentals side of things. Are you doing real life stuff? Are you actually pursuing things that produce real value for people? Are your networks actually useful? And they have a credible argument why they're going to be around in 5 years or 10 years. Those things matter. And then the users will come. Millions of transactions, eventually billions of transactions will be held on these systems, and they will change the lives of millions and eventually billions of people. That's why we're here. Now, any system that does this has network value. The very fact that you brought 1 million people together or 1 billion people together, look how valuable Facebook is. You can extract value through all kinds of ways, and that will be reflected in the markets. But that's a secondary effect as a consequence of utility, not a primary effect as a consequence of your moon boy idiocy. So don't say things like that. It just shows how ignorant you are about what these things are. You're a whole lot of talk, buddy. You are too. Tell me what you've built. Anything? You're the guy listening to me at 10:30 at night on a Friday. You must have a really exciting life. How's your brother and dad doing? Yeah, they're doing great. They're doing great. Lucky Gillette, Wyoming hasn't been hit very hard by COVID. What's really crazy is that they told hospitals to stop doing elective procedures, and this is having serious medical consequences. It's bankrupting hospitals. It's bankrupting private physicians. And actually, it's creating death because people are foregoing necessary medical treatment, either because they've been told to, or that they just have fear of going to the hospital for a variety of reasons. because they think that they'll catch a nosocomial infection. So we're starting to see people die of heart attacks and brain tumors and other things as a consequence of this lockdown. It's definitely not a black and white thing of have a lockdown, you save a lot of lives. By locking things down and shutting the medical system down for these elective procedures, many cases aren't even elective, you're really hurting people and creating a lot of physical pain. And it's sad as physicians to see that. It's really sad. My Scottish Highlanders say hi to your farm. Oh, hell yeah, man. And I love Highlanders. I'm going to get some this year. Stephen Wolf is asking questions you guys should be demanding. All right, I'll bite. What is he asking? Where was he in the chat? He's asking why you're even here. Oh, come on. You don't even have anything? How easy will it be to make an improvement proposal? What if I make a contract that says IOHK must do XYZ and it wins? Ha! You can't compel me to do something. I have to consent. I have to consent to that. As for you're pretty vulgar, I tend to believe what Dan Larimer said about you morally, and also understandable why you were booted out of Ethereum. Okay, great. He's the guy who raised $4 billion, got fined by the SEC, and says he has no moral or fiduciary obligations, and currently is the subject of a class action lawsuit. But hey, you're the troll on the internet who believes everything you read. I pity you. All right, let's see here. It's going to be very easy to write an improvement proposal in principle. And actually, CIP1 is how to write an improvement proposal. And talking to Frederick and the Cardano Foundation, it looks like their first work product is going to be May. So sometime this month, they should have an announcement about that. Basically, they're going to show you a skeleton of what a CIP should look like. And that's a version 1. And the first CIP will probably be to modify the first CIP. So there'll be a recursive thing that happens for a while until we get that process right. But at the end of the day, it's really a matter of how hard should it be to capture what you'd like to do versus capture what has to be reflected in the formal specification. And there's a huge gap there. And that's a discussion that we've been, certainly having. Charles Hoskinson, how do you get mom and pops to using crypto? There's certainly a good argument to be made that crypto won't be what we think because the non-tech people don't get it. If they have to get it, you've already lost. How much do you actually legitimately understand about how your cell phone works? Like, let's just be honest. Like, really think about it. Do you really know how that works? It is probably the single most complicated piece of machinery that humankind has ever constructed. It's got so much stuff in it. They're putting LiDAR in these damn things. You have AI chips. You have like tons of cameras. You have radar modules in some cases. You have gyroscopes. You have the special glass on the screen that's treated with a special chemical so it doesn't shatter when you drop it. You have a multi-touch display that has such sensitivity. You have an ultrasonic fingerprint reader underneath the screen. Okay, each of these things are like dozens of PhD dissertations worth of original science that was done over 50 years, realized by tens of billions of dollars of research and development by literally millions of engineers over the last 10 years. Okay, and this is old. The next generation's already out. This is an S10. I think the S20 is already out, right? And the next thing is going to come out soon with Apple. So the point of consumer products is that complexity that is hidden and it's transformed into magic. There's no pulleys and switches and levers. It's just some sort of rectangular slate. And I put my fingers on it and it does something. If you achieve that, you create something that changes the world and makes it worth billions of dollars. So you ask, how do we get the mainstream people into the ecosystem? By solving problems they have. And I'll give you a very specific problem that if we had solved this would make this lockdown issue very hard in America, very easy in America. It's really a hard situation. So here's the problem. If you're a governor of a state in the United States, you at some point have to make a decision to open your state and let people get back to work. Now, the political insanity that's been set up right now is the minute that you do that, you are automatically blamed for every single person who dies of coronavirus thereafter you've opened up the lockdown. because somebody on the other side of the political argument gets to say to you, the governor, that person wouldn't have died if you kept that lockdown running. Now, we have no evidence of that. We just don't know, but yet you're blamed for it. So you at some point have to have enough political courage to pull that lever, accepting that you're going to be blamed for thousands, if not tens of thousands of deaths that occur after you pull that lever that probably would have happened otherwise, but you're just going to be blamed for it. And this is a nationwide phenomenon. So the incentive is not to open. And what does it mean? It means that you are basically implicitly pulling the other lever to cause agony to 30 million Americans and throw them into homelessness. Wouldn't it be nice if we had an e-voting system where you could directly ask the American people, do you want to open or not? The whole nation, and under what conditions will we open? And allow a supermajority to decide that. Once 66% of the American people do it, we're done and we've reopened. The decision's been made. The governors and the president will follow that, because this is something that's unprecedented. And if we're suspending the whole U.S. Constitution for it, we might as well do it. If we had a blockchain-based voting system, this would be super cheap and easy to do, and you would have confidence in it. Do you have to know anything about tokens, wallets, all that stuff? No. Like the cell phone complexity, that is hidden from you, the consumer. All you know is it works, it's credible, it's there, it's awesome. And the very fact that that system is being used creates network value for the cryptocurrency, the blockchain that's holding that infrastructure. And intermediaries are there to simplify that process. And those intermediaries create on-ramps and off-ramps, and they make it basically easy to use. But yet you still get certainty that the system was operating correctly, because you can independently verify outside of those intermediaries that your vote was recorded and it's what you thought it was. So you can create separation of concerns. That's one example of literally millions that you could come up with across every single business vertical, whether it be product authentication. Another great example, this is why I love the New Balance deals so much. So these are paintings behind me. How do we know they're real or not? Are they replicas? Are they genuine paintings? All these types of things. So generally, indicator come in. Same for those masks behind there, especially rarer ones that are very, very specific. Somebody will say, this is real, or no, it's not. And they put their brand and reputation on that. Well, how do we know that works? That's a very expensive thing. And there's like all kinds of bizarre market dynamics that form. The same for luxury goods, Christian Dior purses, Rolex watches, whatever your fancy happens to be. You're going to have a situation where basically you have something that costs a $30,000 watch. And if you happen to look the wrong way, wear the wrong clothes, wrong ethnicity, people won't even believe it's real, even though it is. How terrible is that? You spend $30,000 for something because you're wearing sweatpants or you're in the wrong area of town. People just assume you're wearing a fake. And it's an Invicta watch, not a Submariner with a 30 dial or something like that. So then you say, hey, wouldn't it be so cool to have a cell phone app? I can just tap my phone on that watch, those shoes, those paintings, whatever, and it'll tell you if it's real or not. That's simple. You use a blockchain for that, and there's all kinds of cool stuff. In fact, we just finalized the donation today to University of Wyoming for that $1.3 million lab, $500,000 from us. It ended up being $505,000 worth of ADA, and the state government's matching that, and then the university's matching $300,000. So it's a $1.3 million lab that we set up, paid for with ADA, first government institution in the world to accept ADA. First university in the world to accept data, and the state of Wyoming is matching it. So they're treating ADA as legal tender. How about that? And that lab, one of the core research agendas of that lab, and they're hiring tenure track people to facilitate this, is to build a chip for authentication. Now, it's going to take a while to get that chip done, but when that chip's done, it'll be dirt cheap to make, it'll be secure, and it can be used as part of the authentication process to embed in products, luxury goods, potentially if a biocapsule can be put on it in cows and sheep, it can be put in all kinds of different things. And you as the consumer, you don't have to know shit about crypto, about blockchain, about anything. You just tap your phone and your phone tells you if it's real or not. Okay, that's your consumer experience. And then for the resale market, the luxury goods manufacturers can get a secondary revenue stream for that. All kinds of cool new business models that you can enable with this. But that's the point. That's the point. It's like you're asking the wrong question if saying, does grandma have to understand it? The answer is no, no more so than grandma understands the iPad or the cell phone or the computer. Okay, she'll never get it. What you need to have is you need to have stuff that's simple, it's easy to use, it's concise, and you just instantly get it and you get the value of it. And you understand why this transforms marketplaces. It solves a real problem. And it solves a problem that you can't solve as an individual company. You have to solve through disintermediation. The problem of authentication of a luxury good is a universal problem for all luxury brands, not just one. And if such a tool existed, all luxury brands would adopt that as part of their brand protection portfolio, because it makes no sense to reinvent the wheel. This is why you need a blockchain, because you have companies that are competitors that don't trust each other, that don't want to hand the authentication of their product to their competitor, and don't want to spend millions of dollars rebuilding the network effect of something. So they would much rather work through a standards-based federation. Blockchain, there you go. And a token, yeah, it's a regulating mechanism inside the system to ensure that the system behaves properly and to finance the system's maintenance and the system's feature richness and so forth. Mm-hmm. By the way, we have a rule here. You cannot call him Chico. You have to call him Molten Tar Monster number 3. We'll even develop a nice 3-dimensional model, and then we'll 3D print it at the lab at University of Wyoming, because they have a maker lab actually at University of Wyoming. And we'll give out little molten tar monsters to people, and it'll have number 3 on it. That's just for him. Could you put it in a vaccine? Yeah, you absolutely could. That's actually what Bill Gates wants to do. How do you avoid paying taxes? You don't. I have faith in only one agency of the U.S. government to accurately and competently behave their duty, and that is the IRS. No other department is going to do their job well, but the IRS will. They will find you. It's like they hired what was Liam Neeson from Taken. It's like, I don't know who you are, but I have a very particular set of skills. I will find you and fine you with interest and penalties. The richer you get, the more you develop an intimate relationship with the IRS. They know you on a first name basis. Actually, that's an interesting case, Justin Fujimoto. The IRS accepting Colorado weed money because they don't have bank accounts for wiring. The IRS actually legally has to accept it. It's literally printed on the money itself. This is legitimate for all debts, foreign and domestic. So, it's a Supreme Court case at some point if they don't accept it. They don't like accepting it because it's just a logistical nightmare. There actually have been some back and forth about people have tried to do crazy things like pay their taxes with pennies, because they just say, fuck the government. And, I'm going to pay in pennies to make this as painful as possible. But certainly if they have no ability to bank themselves, it would be unreasonable for the IRS to say that they could not do that. Charles, is that water running, I hear? Yes, it is. I have a hydroponic set up right there, and I'm growing jalapeno peppers and chilies, super hot chilies. They're quite nice. How was your meeting with General Mcchrystal? I was going to meet General Mcchrystal in D.C., and the day I was going to meet him, he had emergency surgery. So I met some other people from the Mcchrystal group, including a major general, and we took some cards, and my chief of staff has been communicating with his chief of staff. And at some point, I might even set up a mentoring arrangement, because they're a really good leadership organization. And Mcchrystal's a really nice guy. He's a smart dude, and he's, Team of Teams was a good book. And really, his whole thing is about how do you get organizations to work well together when you don't have explicit mandates or power. So it's not so good for the leadership of IOHK. There's some value that could provide. But it's much better when you're talking about that tripartite between Emergo, CF, and IO, where we're all equal parties and we have to work together, but not always do we work together as well as we should. So it's super important that we find different structures to collaborate when power is more horizontal than vertical. And Team of Teams is a really good curriculum for that. So I have a lot of respect for Stanley Mcchrystal, and we were going to meet up with him at some point. And, Corona made that very difficult. But I do generally talk to a lot of people in the defense complex and the intelligence complex, from former people at various agencies to, generals like Mcchrystal and others, because a lot of them are now in private industry. They work either in consulting groups or like Petraeus works for not Kleiner Perkins, but Kravis, KKR, these types of houses. And so they have a lot of decision authority behind capital, the deployment of capital. And they're, of course, really concerned about where cryptocurrencies are going to go. Cryptocurrencies create a geopolitical reality that's very interesting to the defense industry, where first they potentially have an impact on a fundamental tool of statecraft, which is sanctions. So that is always in the backdrop. And then second, they allow you to do things like create alternative views of the economy. And so you can use them for collection of intelligence. So there's definitely a component there that they're very interested in. And then there's also a situation where they actually, in some cases, could potentially eventually define who gets to run the country. For example, if you move your census and identity system and voting system to a cryptocurrency-based system, well, then we, a small Wyoming company, could actually potentially have a huge impact on the elections of some foreign government. So there's like a Logan Act consideration there. There's all kinds of craziness that could come up. So, we regularly talk to State Department and other people just to make sure that everything is nicely balanced in the way we think. And also, U.S. government is a great resource about what's going on in countries. And I encourage any person who's a U.S. citizen, who is a U.S. business owner, who does business abroad, to actually spend some time talking to the State Department in the country you're doing business in. For example, I had lunch with the ambassador of Mongolia. I was meeting the president of Mongolia, and we talked to the State Department, and we said, hey, can we talk to the ambassador before we meet the president? Why? Because I wanted to understand what was the U.S. position on Mongolia, and what did the U.S. government know about Mongolia that could potentially be relevant to things, because they kind of have an opinion on things like political stability. Whether a particular regime is long-lived or short-lived, who is really the kingmaker in the country. We spend billions of dollars literally to gather this information, and the State Department usually is well more than willing to give you some ideas of people you shouldn't do business with or should do business with, or the stability of affairs in that country, or concerns like, is there proper rule of law, or are there kangaroo courts, or these types of things. You see, this is something that many entrepreneurs don't get, especially in countries like the United States, is that while the government as a monolithic entity is in many cases incompetent, counterproductive, fraud-filled, and wasteful, there are still millions of people who wake up every day who provide services which we pay for out of our wallet as taxpayers, from the Small Business Administration to things in the federal government like the State Department. And the people who work in those capacities as civil servants are well more capable of having conversation with you on a regular basis, retired or otherwise. And in some cases, it's so easy. Just pick up the phone, call them, or send them an email, take them to lunch. And, in some cases, nobody talks to them. And so they're well more than willing just to sit down and give you an exhaustive conversation about things that they've learned. And remember, if somebody spent 20 years of their life in some environment with the U.S. flag behind them, the most powerful government in the world, they're bound to be a pretty good domain expert and have a very nuanced, very comprehensive, fact-driven view of that jurisdiction and the realities of doing business in that jurisdiction. This is one of the reasons why we've been able to scale to 20 countries and navigate those and not run into a lot of little local problems, because we've been very systematic and careful about how we approach these governments, how we talk to them. And we also understand what the U.S. position is. So we kind of know where our flexibility can be in that respect. Charles, what was your impression about Georgia, Tbilisi, and people are ready for crypto? Absolutely. I think Georgia's ahead of the game. Georgia has one of the most impressive governments I've ever interacted with, absolutely ever interacted with. They are incredibly efficient. They're fast, forward-thinking, super easy to pay your taxes. They only have 3 different types of taxes: flat tax. Everything there runs very well. The tourism minister, before I left the country, called us, repeatedly emailed us, and she's like, "We will do anything to have your conference here." They were just a great government to talk to and work with. And everything's almost always digital. Like, we're doing an academic credential project. It's really easy to do because there's a central government repository of diplomas. So it's just a matter of extracting that and putting it into a blockchain format from a central custodial set. So there's a great foundation to build on there. This farmer voucher program we're bidding on, only 2% of the 6 million farmers that it's relevant for have cell phones. 98% are not digitized and not pegged. Very different reality. You have to think really carefully. Like, even if you want to give them Tangem cards, it's like, how do you cost that? $2 a card, $12 million just to onboard them to a plastic card. And that's not even going to solve the problem. There's enormous logistical issues in those types of deals. So Georgia's well ahead of the game. And I wish America worked like Georgia in certain respects. They really thought through a few things, and they care about taking their country into the 21st century. Then there are some other things that are still regressive, as with all countries. Nothing is perfect. What about Armenia and Azerbaijan? So the old joke in Georgia is that whatever Georgia has done, Armenia invented first. If you're Georgian, you really understand that one. There's a little bit of a rivalry between Armenia and Georgia. Armenia is a beautiful country as well. Do you agree with Elon Musk that the coronavirus is overblown? Should we be in lockdown? I did a whole series of videos, 3 of them on propaganda, where I go into exhaustive detail on that topic, and I'd highly encourage you to look in that. And we even have a doctor in the chat who's quite prominent in the Cardano community. Succinctly, as I've said repeatedly, I feel that we should use a science and fact-based approach to handling this crisis. And all data and evidence are pointing in a trend, in a direction that people who get this tend to be resilient to it, and that the majority of people who get it have mild to asymptomatic cases, and that this only seems to be affecting certain subsets of the population, which probably can be isolated and still safely allowing the rest of the people to get back to work. And this is based on data from Iceland, the Netherlands, New York City, California, all the places we looked at antibody tests, and just common sense about how epidemiological models work and how viruses spread. Frankly, to coordinate a global lockdown was too hard. So there were many cases where lockdown did not occur. And yet, despite that, we're not really seeing a big difference between the lockdown and the unlockdown places. And what happens is that there's media manipulation with the numbers. So, for example, they say Iowa is experiencing the fastest rate of increase. There's only been, last time I checked, like 130 deaths in Iowa out of a 3 million person population from coronavirus. And furthermore, their testing infrastructure was some of the worst in the nation. And now they're finally getting it online. So are we seeing a dramatic increase in cases because everybody in Iowa is not in quarantine, or are we seeing it because they're finally testing people for the first time? And that's saying nothing about the nature of that case fatality rate. I've seen a lot of reports where people are potentially reporting deaths as COVID that were other things because there's just a lot of pressure to do that, or perhaps a financial incentive to do that. A lot of this stuff is just like monkey business all around. It's going to take years to sort out all this monkey business. But my opinion is that I really firmly believe we need to seriously start getting people back to work, because the consequences of being locked down for too long means that we will have an equal or greater amount of death, a substantially greater amount of human misery, and potentially global instability. In fact, even nation states collapsing. And of course, that results in even more death if we keep the lockdown going on too long. You want an example of that? Look at Iraq. What caused the rebellion? Was it hatred of America, or the fact that we had a 30% unemployment rate in Iraq for a long time? Idle hands do the devil's work. And that's a saying you got to remember all the way through. And if you do something that creates suddenly 30 million unemployed people in your economy, that's going to be super problematic if that persists for a long period of time. and those people aren't going to take it. And there's just too much stuff going on to allow this to go on too long. So segregate populations, use a fact-based approach, look to where the data takes you. And frankly, we are starting to get reasonable therapeutics from remdesivir to others. So there's just no reason to continue doing this long term. And it's not clear if a vaccine is going to work. There's already 30 different strains of coronavirus in the wild. You ask your question, why doesn't the flu virus go away if we can make vaccines? Because by the time you make the vaccine doesn't work anymore for some of the strains that populate through. These are very mutagenic. So similarly, by the time a vaccine comes out for the original strain, it's a moving target. So unless they come up with some magic, it's very unlikely that coronavirus is going to go away in 2021. It's potentially a double flu season now for doctors to contend with for years to come. A double season. So you get your corona season and you get your influenza season. So what? We're just going to fucking live in indefinite lockdown? It's a crazy prospect. You have to at some point accept that life is dangerous. My grandfather lived with polio in that whole reality. There was a president who had it. Nixon had brothers who had tuberculosis and died of it. Life goes on. The economy can function. Humanity can function. We still went to the moon. Despite the fact that medicine wasn't as evolved. Oh yeah, the Greek universities for diploma validations. That was a pilot that we did with a local firm, and I believe it was University of Athens, and it may have been NTU. I'll have to look. It was another Greek university as well, and we completed that pilot, and we used a permission ledger for it. And a lot of the knowledge that we gained from that was the basis of what we did for the Georgia project for credential verification. It's not the financially sexiest of things to do, but it gets your foot in the door, and then you can start talking around additional services once you have that set up. You don't make a lot of money, but it's a good customer acquisition play at a low cost. Yeah, rollback functionality. That's really controversial. I'm not a big fan of rollbacks unless they're explicitly built into a smart contract and both parties agree. And it's not a protocol level thing, but it's a value added feature that's particular to the contract. Marlowe would somehow let you do that potentially. But I'm not a fan of doing it at the protocol level like EOS does. I don't think it makes a lot of sense. Charles, what do you think about Iran and America? Can they act like this forever? That's the classic case of the immovable object meets the unstoppable force. Um, we were friends with Iran for a while. Even Richard Helms, who used to run the CIA, was the ambassador there. And in his private life, he even took care of the wealthy Iranians before the revolution. And the reason why we were friends is we displaced a democratically elected government in the 50s and replaced it with a king. And that king was our buddy. He wasn't a nice guy, but he was pro-US. And this is an example of the foolishness of foreign policy and the consequences of blowback in the 20th century. Everything from our relationship to Pinochet to Operation Paperclip with the Nazis we allowed to come to the United States, to all kinds of horrible things that we've done from a foreign policy perspective. In fact, this was one of the principal reasons why I joined the Ron Paul campaign. I was so profoundly tired about the hypocrisy of U.S. foreign policy. We are great people, the people in the United States. We're ethical people, and we're some best people in the world to do business with, and it's best country, bar none, to live in. The one flaw, if not our greatest flaw, I should say, is our inability to really appreciate the magnitude of the things we've done as a nation state beyond our borders and the consequences that these actions have held globally. And what happens is that the minute they even start talking about it, propaganda clicks in and people say, you hate our soldiers or you think America's evil. And in proportionality, the reality is us or the commies. The Soviet Empire by no means were nice people. They were evil people. They killed 100 million people throughout their reign. They invented the concept of systematic destruction of human beings, their psyche. Communism is a sickness, and anybody who subscribes to it is seduced by evil. It's not good. And of course, everybody says, oh, well, they didn't have the right flavor of it. No, I'm sorry. There's no flavor that excuses mass murder or the government control of every fiber and aspect of your life. So in many ways, people thought that the ends justified the means. And so we looked at the world as a big chessboard, and the United States made decisions to do things that were, in a local sense, in a private sense, profoundly evil, because they believed that they were pushing for a greater good to eventually win a Cold War against an enemy that we could not directly attack because of nuclear warfare. So sensible reason decides to never talk about these things. They just talk about meaningless things, about like who says we should inject Lysol or not, but we never actually talk about our relationship with the entire world. So Iran is no different in that respect. Here we have a regime that is also a bad regime. The Iranian government is evil because they oppress their people. They force a theocratic regime on people. They stone gay people. They do horrible things, and there's no excuse for the things that they do to their people. No one lives in freedom in Iran. The Iranian people are as tired of their government as we are, and we see every opportunity they get, they take to the streets and they protest, and they're trying very hard to get real meaningful political change, and they tend to get battered down time and again. So then there's an open question within the foreign policy circles of, well, do sanctions make sense? The Obama administration felt that perhaps through trade and perhaps through an embracing, we could gradually de-radicalize the government. And over time, the old guard would die off, and the new guard that came would not have the same political mandate to enforce tyranny. The more conservative elements feel that the only option is regime change, which has never really worked well for us, especially in Iraq and Afghanistan and other places. And so what you do is you put these regime in a pressure cooker and you get them to a point where they get very brittle, and then you wait for an opportunity to come and push the regime. For example, coronavirus is a great opportunity for that viewpoint to potentially create a decapitation strike. Key members of the government got ill and died. The government's credibility is broken. They can't get proper medical supplies, which creates incredible civil unrest in the government. And perhaps that can be leveraged and let no crisis go to waste. It's a really fucked up way of thinking, but that's the nature of spycraft, and that's the nature of statecraft. You don't think of things in moral terms or ethical terms. You don't think about the tragedies people endure. You're asking, how does this create weakness? The very same people look at Russia and they look at Vladimir Putin's stability as leader of Russia, and they realize that he's a king when oil's $150 a barrel. When oil's $15 a barrel, his economy is not going to last very long, and then there's going to be a lot of long knives reaching for him, and his power base will rapidly deteriorate. The very same people look at Xi's prominence in China, and they realize that if we can turn the world against China as a consequence of their response to coronavirus, it could create a depression within China, which would dramatically weaken Xi's position, and the mandate of heaven will shift, and he'll be pushed out of power. The very same people are looking to Kim Jong-un. I've read reports that he had a heart surgery, and the doctor who performed the heart surgery had coronavirus and spread it to him, and he was ventilated or in a very serious condition. And that's why an elite Chinese team of doctors who happened to be connected to Wuhan went to North Korea. And so that's why people tend to believe he's dead or not doing so well or doesn't have a good long-term prognosis. This disease particularly is very vicious on the fat, and Kim Jong-un is a fat guy. So there's evil in the world, and no one has blood-free hands. Perhaps Switzerland does, because nobody cares to invade them, and they have decided to recuse themselves from the world. But they have different kinds of blood. There's more than a single bar of Nazi gold floating around that country. So the consequences are that you just have to look at things from a nuanced perspective and understand if your goal is perfection, then you're never going to find it. If your goal is purity, you're never going to find it. The Vatican Bank is just as corrupt as the rest of them. Even the nations that profess to speak for God, they don't speak so well about it. Instead, what you have to do is ask yourself, well, what kind of a world would you like to live in? And how should nations interact with each other? And how should people interact with each other? And when you choose liberty and freedom, and you choose peace and trade, generally things work out better for the most part, and people get along for the most part. But you have to have faith that people can be tolerant of each other and accept each other for who they are. And you have to have faith that people can ultimately set aside their worst impulses and embrace their better angels of their nature. The tools certainly help. The communication mediums certainly help. But bad incentives cause lots of problems. And that's the story of the 20th century in a nutshell. By the way, the 21st century is going to be no different. We are facing existential problems in a certain respect. The rise of AI, super concerning. People are criticizing Musk for his Twitter meltdown. I will remind you that he's one of the few people around who has the resources and the mindset to actually make meaningful progress on the strong AI problem of how do we avoid this thing from ending the human race? It's amazing that we don't really think in these terms. We ask ourselves, well, what will happen 10 generations from now, 20 generations from now when we release this technology? Let's say that coronavirus was not a manufactured disease. It's not inconceivable that the next one won't be an escape from a lab and be far, far worse. What if you mix some rabies in with your HIV, with your coronavirus? Would you like to catch that? I mean, look, we're entering an age where this engineering is possible. And it's not inconceivable that nation states are experimenting and toying with it, and not inconceivable that small, very radicalized groups of crazy people, because of the cost reduction of doing these things, will develop the sophistication necessary to unleash these things upon the world. So when you have these existential problems, in the past it was nuclear warfare. In the past it was let's avoid another world war because we had two within a 20-year band. When you have these existential problems, you do need some governance to work your way through it and solve these things. And people have to get along somehow, some way. And unfortunately, while you're thinking about how to do that, some cases have to give up some of your liberty. You have to accept that some of your personal freedoms may go away, or you have to accept that some people may have additional power over you. The point of our industry is to create tools that minimize that. A third option between total liberty and total tyranny, tyranny of necessity and liberty of morality, to a third option where you can keep your liberty, but you get the value as if you lived in a more controlled environment. That's the hope. And that's what we're chasing. That's why it's worth our life. It's worth our time to actually be here and have these conversations and think about these things. Because we want to live in a world where we don't wake up one day and we live in a dystopia. We want to live in a world where somebody can't basically arbitrarily tell us that we have to stay in our home and can't leave, what job we can work, where our children get to go, what schools they get to go to, if any at all, just because of an arbitrary factor, and you can't change that. And if you complain about it, you get gulagged. It's certainly a huge issue, and this is why we do what we do. Looking at Iran and America, that's just a microcosm of a macrocosm of an even greater problem of how does the world order work, and how do we get the world order to work better for everybody, and how do we actually make sure that nation states are good to their people without resorting to the heavy hand of sanctions or spycraft or tradecraft that involves assassinations and coups and these types of things. And hopefully we get there, but it's going to take a lifetime of work. Iran is a beautiful country too. It's really a shame that it's been excommunicated from the nation state. The Persian history is so rich, and there's just so many amazing things that happen there. Great cuisine, beautiful architecture, and it was a wonderful place to go and visit years ago. And now it's just isolated and excommunicated. The same for the mountains of North Korea. Beautiful place as well. There's so much natural beauty in that country. And it's just the hermit state now. It's been excommunicated. Charles, do you follow theoretical physics topics? Your favorite study to read up on? There's a lot of cool math in theoretical physics, so I can read some of the papers. I can't make heads or tails if they're right or wrong because I don't have enough foundational physics knowledge to be able to assess things. I can tell you that they're using a lattice thing right, or the way they're applying some metric tensor is right or whatever. I mean, I know what the notation means. And if I spend enough time staring at the paper, eventually a few things make sense, but it's not my area of expertise. Do you think you could speak about your relationship with ETC over the past 2 years in the lens of being the CEO of IOHK? Has that relationship grown apart? Thoughts on the future relationship? I got involved in ETC for philosophical reasons. It was the accidental project. I was deeply disturbed because I've told this story so many times. I don't even think it's worth going into all the nuances and details, but very succinctly, there was a social contract when the ICO occurred for Ethereum. And there's a lot of cowardice in the Ethereum inner circle. People didn't even want to say, is it an ICO or not? Like when Joe Lubin gets interviewed, did Ethereum do an ICO? Can't give a statement. Why? Because he doesn't want regulation. It's like, okay, Joe, I know the game. Fair game, but come on. In some cases, you call a spade a spade. It was an ICO. They raised money. Great. And there was an unclear social contract. You had the Bitcoin people coming in saying, we want better Bitcoin. We believe code is law. You created funny words like illegality. Words matter, philosophy matters, and immutability is important. Then you had another group of people that came in and said, we want to do stuff, DeFi, we want to build things. And this is an experimental platform. We got to change the platform, and we're going to make mistakes and screw stuff up. Now, what was the ratio of code is law versus move fast and break things? We didn't know. And so my opinion was, if you take $1 from those people, even if it's 99.1, you are defrauding at least one person when you suddenly change the whole social contract of the system. And you cannot do a vote with 8% participation on a knee-jerk reaction and say that is a justification to do something. Maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong. So I said there needs to be both options. You have an Ethereum Classic and Ethereum, and the foundation should support both, and let the community decide which one they want to support. And you will see through hash rate and market capitalization and deployment on the chain which way to go. And had they done that, the market would have probably still chosen the same outcome, which was 80-20 or 90-10 in terms of market capitalization, hash rate, and other such things. Fine. So I put my money where my mouth was because they weren't willing to do it. I spent $1.5 million of my own money building Mantis and hiring community managers like Christian Severino and Carlos Vicari. And then later on, I hired Kevin Lord, and we created Let's Talk ETC, and we did tons of things in that ecosystem. And then I created a plan. I wrote it all down. I said, guys, if you want to innovate, I wrote blog posts and said, this is the direction we could go to clearly differentiate our community and ecosystem from Ethereum. We can't say we're all following Vitalik's original vision if we're created as a divergence from Vitalik. It's like this bizarre thing, like when the Meiji Restoration was happening in Japan and the samurai were rebelling against the government, but still supported the emperor and said they're rebelling for the emperor against the emperor's government. It's like, come on, guys. You just can't do that. You have to carve your own path and go down your own way. And that was not really accepted by the Ethereum Classic community. They didn't want to do a treasury. I got brutally attacked by some members of the community. They wrote these bizarre articles saying it was a hostile takeover and a coup. If we were attempting the hostile takeover or coup of the Ethereum Classic community, we would have just simply hard forked and said, deal with it, pound sand, and fractured the community and used standard PSYOP techniques to drag people with us. It would have been easy to do that. But that wasn't the point. We said, this is what we'd like to do. And the community said, no, we don't really want to innovate. We don't want to change the EVM very substantially. We don't want to change the consensus protocol. We don't want to do things that are distinctly different from Ethereum. And I said, okay, well, can we at least get some funding for Mantis? We spent $1.5 million of our own money to build this client in Scala. And at that point, it was the only client that was built from the ground up, 100% new code, specifically for ETC, full node for ETC. And at one point, it worked on both Ethereum and Ethereum Classic. So we actually were an Ethereum core developer as a consequence of this. We even paid to formalize the EVM through K. We spent $250,000 on that. We give all of this to the ETC community, and they say, no funding. We're not going to give you any money. And in fact, we're going to give you partial funding. And Bob Summerwell had the balls to say, I would look petty if I demanded 100% funding. I'd only get a partial subsidy to work on ETC. He's literally sent this to me in an email. I could not believe reading these things. I'm like, guys, I've carried your water for you for years. I built a client from nothing and paid for it myself. And I gave it to the key community for free as a starting point. And I also have a beautiful roadmap we could use. Can you please subsidize at least supporting this particular client? And I say, you get a partial subsidy. What are we supposed to do? Just be a charity case for the rest of time with a project that doesn't want to listen to these things and wants to go in a different direction? They have every right to go in a different direction. But if we're not really able to contribute or collaborate and nobody's going to really pay us to do anything in the ecosystem, then why are we there? What value are we providing other than to make people who don't like us in Ethereum money who happen to hold on to their ETC? It's just a stupid thing. It was just a crazy thing from that perspective. And I tried very hard to build good relationships there. And I tried very hard to find peace and a way of getting that where it needed to go. And you know what? They figured it out for themselves. It's a stable community. There's some good people there. I actually like a lot of the community members in ETC. And I get along with a lot of the community members in ETC. And we have no animosity there. It's just there's no commercial interest for IOHK. There's nothing we can make money on. And it makes no sense for us to deploy dApps on Ethereum Classic. Why? We'd have to write them in Solidity on a broken design model that we've already determined through tens of millions of dollars of research does not work. And that's why we built Cardano. That's why we wrote Plutus and Marlowe and the extended UTXO model. We literally spent 4 years painfully working our way to a different model for dApps. So we won't be able to build any dApps on Ethereum Classic because they're sticking with the EVM. They won't even go to Yella, a better model, a much, much better model. So there's no dApps I can build that make any sense. There's not a lot of network effect there. There's not a lot of people using this. So there's no network capture where I can get people from that. So what do I gain? You know, where's the business model for this? Yes, I philosophically agree with it because I was there in the beginning and we had an unclear social contract. Everybody deserved the option and people chose and they went off on their own side and now they're very divergent projects and they have different leadership and different people. Great. But mission accomplished then. The moral obligation was met and I put my money where my mouth was. I spent over $1.5 million of my own money, more than most people will see in a lifetime. And no one paid me for it. And my thank you from that community was, well, okay. And then I think to myself, okay, if somebody came into the Cardano ecosystem and spent $1.5 million building their own wallet and independently contributing and helping us out and providing a really cool roadmap, I would invite that person to my ranch and I would cook them bacon in the morning. And whatever they wanted to do that day, if they want to go horseback riding, they want to go to, the Estes Park, we want to go drive the mountains in my cars, whatever, we go do that. I'd be like, this dude is nice. This is a good person. We should keep and value these people in our ecosystem. There are people in our ecosystem that send me recipes for venison. And I read their letters out and I take the time of day to acknowledge them. And that's a small thing compared to that contribution. And what do we get for it? Nothing. So it's not a good community in that respect or a welcoming community in that respect. And it deeply bothered me. It really did. It made me sad because it felt like unfinished business. And it felt like we really legitimately could have done something great. So we still have a team that writes Scala code, and they're doing super cool, amazing things. And it's so sad that those amazing things that they're doing will not benefit the Ethereum Classic ecosystem. They'll just do something else. And it's very soon the world will see that innovation that they've done. But it's just one of those case studies where people shoot themselves in the foot, and it's a consequence of poor governance and a lack of respect for some desire to unify around divergence, to get out of a safety zone and go somewhere real. And it's just sad. And we thought about it a lot, and we tried. We went to Vancouver, we went to Korea, we went to Hong Kong, we went to all the summits. I really honestly tried, and I met everybody there. We really tried to build relationships. And I'm sad that those relationships are not better. That said, we learned a lot. There was incalculable value working on Ethereum Classic with that parallel Scala team, because while it didn't slow down Cardano, this is another one of those idiocies of Molten Tar Monster. They believe that somehow because we had developers from a totally different company writing in a totally different program language, totally different management in a different part of the company using different funds, that somehow slowed down the Cardano delivery. Would that have made Aggelos write the Ouroboros papers faster? No. Would that have made the programming language people develop Plutus faster? No. What it did do is it gave us a deeper understanding of where Ethereum was at, so we could better compete with it. So it was industrial espionage in that respect. We knew where all the bodies were buried after we built an Ethereum wallet because we had to build it. So every little workaround and bug and problem and little thing that was a moral hazard or a technological hazard in that design, we could then take all that knowledge and give it to the guys designing Plutus and the guys designing Cardano and say, hey, look, let's not do that. We would have not been in that position had we not built Mantis. So there was an enormous value that we gained out of the construction of Mantis. I'm just sad that Mantis never got bigger. Everybody who used Mantis, overwhelmingly positive response to it. Was one of our fastest project, our most transparent project. If you go to the IOHK YouTube page, you can see weekly videos with Alan McSherry and his team every single week, systematically saying, this is what we plan on doing, these 4 stages, this is where we're at, and this is what we did this week. Developers, go. 7 developers, every one of them. What did you do this week? And they do a little demo. Demo after demo after for a year and a half, they did that every week. It's just amazing transparency on that. And it worked with both Ethereum and Ethereum Classic. And it was 10,000 lines of code for a full node. The most concise Ethereum client ever built by any team. And we built it for $1.5 million. They raised $18 million and they barely got something out of the door. So I was very proud of that. And I was very sad about where that ecosystem went. And I was very sad about some of the blog posts that were written and how we were treated by ETC Dev, and where they would actually repost these clearly slanderous blog posts over and over again just for fun. And they just kicked us in the teeth just for fun. And I'm just thinking, like, we're here to help, guys. If you treat your allies this way, what the hell are you going to do to your enemies? But, you live, you learn. This is how, being a CEO is about. You have products that don't quite go the way you want to go. You can always find a silver lining somewhere. You can always find a light at the end of the tunnel somewhere. You always can move on and do greater things. And actually, because our participation in Ethereum Classic wasn't as successful as we needed it to be, it gave us a lot of time to think about better ways of doing treasury, better ways of handling social dynamics, and also a lot more stuff about ways to create more network value for Cardano. So ultimately, it was a better benefit for the Cardano project. I'm just sad that for that particular group of people, we weren't able to do more for them. That said, they're doing their own thing, and they got their own ecosystem, and ETC is now its own reality, and it's able to govern itself. So from a decentralization viewpoint, they seem to be perfectly happy where they're at. And so as a result, we wish them well. We really do. And if there ever was an opportunity for us to come back in and there was real funding available, not this, we'll give you 70% or 60% and you have to do it on a shoestring budget and nobody can speak English. No, it's real funding. We'd actually come back in and at least get Mantis to work and follow a conservative roadmap, because I really do enjoy writing software in that ecosystem, even if it's flawed. you got to get passionate about this stuff too. You really do. You know, you live long enough to have a real opinion and, have the courage to express it. Back it with facts, events, circumstances, and be passionate about it. Love it. A lot of people disagree with me. I'm a strong personality, and I've been very vocal, and I really push hard on things. It pisses the hell out of people. But every now and then they say I'm right. And at least it forces the conversation. And I'm fully willing to admit that some of the things I think may be wrong. But at the end of the day, I at least try to bring to the table something new and refreshing and a different way of thinking about things that I hope eventually ends up being useful to somebody somewhere in the world. The work we did on ETC actually valued Ethereum. It helped Ethereum because we gave them the first set of formal semantics for the Ethereum virtual machine. Little things like that. That brought real value to the Ethereum class, to the Ethereum ecosystem. And we actually gained some good friends out of that and good people to talk to out of that. And it's not black and white. When I go to FDev or any of these Ethereum conferences, I do meet a lot of people in the Ethereum community we actually have good relationships with that are Cardano admirers as a direct consequence of some of the work we've done. So that creates value where you find it. So keep an open mind and don't take things too seriously. And I do get frustrated from time to time, especially when I think I brought a deal to the table that makes everybody richer, everybody better, and makes the space as a whole better. And for some reason, nobody just wants to work with us or do something with it, either because of ego or ignorance or cult of personality, or in some cases, just not really understanding what we're bringing to the table and not valuing it the same way that we value it. Like we value peer review very heavily. A lot of our competitors don't. Am I still involved in Zen Horizon? Yeah, I still work with Rob, and we have a good relationship with them. Roman Olenikov and his guys do that. Yeah, well, Bob Summerwall wrote a lot of nice tweets about Cardano, and I have nothing personally against Bob. I criticize the decisions and behaviors and comments that people make in the context that they're made, not the people. I will never criticize Bob. I think he's a good actor and he's got a good heart. I just thought it was very distasteful to tell me that I should continue working on a product with no profit and take a loss when there's no economic reality or upside. It's basically a donation to a dead project that is not allowing us to contribute on equal terms with anybody else. And there's not a lot of transparency in that leadership structure there. So I told Bob that to his face. Told him that over email. I'll tell him here in this thing. When he does and says things I don't like, I say it. And when he does and says things that I agree with, I say it too. I drank maple syrup on the stage with the guy, and I'd do it again. And I'd be glad to continue going to dinner with him, talking to him. And every now and then, if he comes to me with a good idea, I'll look at it with a blank slate and believe that we can find common ground. And so that's just the way I do things. And we live in an age where if somebody disagrees with you, there's this assumption that they have to be disagreeable and your enemy. The reality is that if you disagree with somebody, it should be for that thing. And there's going to be other things you agree on, but you don't get rid of the friendship. You don't get rid of any of these other things. And I'd like to consider that as the case with Bob. And honestly, Words in the Wilderness, why somebody reject Manus, I don't understand it. It's a beautiful product. It's one of my proudest moments. I finally got a chance to finish what I started with Ethereum and build a full Ethereum node. And we built it in a year and a half, and we built it with a 7-person team off of $1.5 million. And it's better than anything Vitalik or these other guys ever wrote. And it was security audited by Kudelski. If you Google ETC Mantis Kudelski audit, Kudelski, you'll actually see a security audit for it. So we produce also security audited code, and we use Scala check. There's semi-formal methods in that development. It was amazing. I really loved it. It was so much fun reading that guy. I'm a really good Scala guy. I love Scala as a programming language. It's one of my favorite languages, and it was so much fun working on that. I really enjoyed it. So yeah, I don't know why anybody rejected it. It's also a very pragmatic client because you get everything from the Java ecosystem, the whole JVM. SBT is a great tool. The JVM is a great ecosystem. There's tons of stuff there. Yeah, you take a little bit of a performance hit, There's tons of things you can do to optimize. Write your crypto in Rust. There's all kinds of things you can do for that. But Jesus Christ. Yeah, oh, exactly. The friendship between Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. Wonderful example. Or Bill Clinton and George H.W. Bush. Literally, they ran against each other for president. And, you know, when Clinton got older, he considered H.W. Bush to be his dad. I mean, there's strange bedfellows in history, and it's amazing that people can be so far apart politically, can be friends and actually find common ground with each other. Hey, Charles, how many days for the Friends and Family Shelley testnet? I can't give dates. I give those to Aparna, but it'll, the delta between the Friends and Family testnet and the actual official testnet for everybody, my hope is both of them would live within the month of May. Unforeseen consequences could prevent that, but there's nothing indicating that that's going to be the case. So there's going to be a close relationship between these two. The exact delta, it's up to the product managers to decide. But, if you think of what needs to be done between what we give to friends and family and what we give to the stake pool operator, it's not significant. And really, it's an opportunity for us to get a better experience for the next wave of people that come on. So it's not like two discrete things. It's more of a spectrum, and then we get comfortable with that spectrum and then release that. So I wouldn't imagine that that's a significant delta. Will Ethereum 2.0 make Cardano obsolete? No. In fact, all the core protocols of Cardano are better than what Ethereum 2.0 will be once finished in every category. We're more Byzantine resistant. We have explicit blockchain-based governance, which Ethereum hasn't even touched at all. We have a better idea of how to update the system. We have a significantly better network design than anything that they proposed in 2.0, and our consensus protocol is better. Plus, with Hydra, our theoretical throughput is orders of magnitude better than anything that can achieve with ledger-based sharding. And we don't have to implement enormous complexity to achieve ledger-based sharding because we can do all this in a single shard environment with a layer 2 solution and still get 1,000 TPS on the single shard environment with maximum optimization. Makes no sense at all, Ethereum 2's direction. And it's a classic example of they tried 500 things, they settled on one thing that made sense, and they're just about to push their whole community into a world of trade-offs and endless debates over parameter this, parameter that. We're fighting over pledging and K. Imagine having 16 parameters you have to set, and those parameters can mean that you lose your money. It's much more controversy. And they're going to have Eth2 and Eth1 living at the same time. So there's going to actually be an Ethereum Classic, and they're going to be a war with themselves during this transition. The minute that they said we're going to have a fight over ProgPow, I knew for a fact that they had no intention of shipping proof of stake quickly. Because why the hell would you even bother to change your proof of work algorithm if you're planning on deploying your proof of stake algorithm in a 6-month time horizon? Why even have the fight? Just go straight to proof of stake. Unless you don't think it's going to be 6 months. It's going to be 2 years, 3 years, and you need to solve your difficulty bomb. You need to solve your issues today. So I think there's a lot of intellectual dishonesty there, and we wish them well. And if they do cool stuff, great. But no, it's not. It's not all it's cracked up to be. What about their ZK rollups? Yes, Starkware. Dump a bunch of money into Starks, an academic concept that is going to require a tsunami, a metric fuck ton of research to get into a practical contract. I love Eli Ben Sas, and he's a good guy. And we had an opportunity to invest in Starkware as well. And we talked to him at Eurocrypt. His papers are great. They're post-quantum resistant. They've done cool things like Stark Dex. There's good stuff there. It's legitimately solid research, and they are one of the pioneers in the ZK industry. But there's a world of difference from being a pioneer in a science to go to reality and actually get that into a product. They'd be the first to admit that. And it's going to require years and years and years and years of hard work to get to a point where these things are practical. And I believe ultimately over an arc of time, 5 to 10 years, they'll probably get there, which is why Intel Ventures and others put money into their company. It's a real thing. There's real stuff there. It's not fake. It's real. It's good research. There's good scientists, good engineers at that firm. But it's a long arc. We do ZK research. We wrote Sonics. We implemented it. It took a year and a half, actually almost 2 years now, from when we wrote the paper to the finalized implementation. We just did the presentation with Markov Kohlweiss about it. And we're opening those libraries up. They're written in Rust. It was not easy. It was very much not easy. And Sonic is not even in the magnitude of complexity and scope of what Starks are trying to achieve. There's just a lot more there that's in their agenda. So to do roll-ups and all these other things, it's optimistic to believe that they're in the short time horizon. But they are the only mechanism that I've seen long-term recursive snarks, these types of structures, to get to occlusive accountability when you have a petabyte scale system. So they are a necessary long-term component. It was very wise for Vitalik to put money into it. And I think that was one of the best teams to ride on. We just had a unique advantage that we kind of went and poached Microsoft at the Cambridge campus, and it put us in a unique position where we were able to have a slightly different approach that we figured we could get things to market a little faster and also pursue slightly orthogonal research, in particular private computation through non-homomorphic means. I just listened to say everything about F2 is inferior to Cardano. I mean, I just pointed out facts. They're a third to a quarter Byzantine resistant, depending on how they parameterize their protocol. We're 50%. That's a fact. Okay. So you disagree with facts. Okay. You're an idiot. It's just that simple. You can also believe that, you don't need to drink water. Try that out for a while. You can also believe the earth is flat. Build your own rocket. How'd that work out for the last guy who did it? It's amazing to me how we've just gotten to a point where people just don't want to listen anymore. They've set their opinion in the sand and they say, this is the way it is. And I don't care if I get any evidence to the contrary. You're wrong. I'm right. Okay. If you believe in F2, go to that ecosystem. It's big. It's Big Tent. Go go worship Vitalik. Go bow at that shrine and love Ethereum. And you'll be happy. And you can go to little conferences and put your little unicorn shirt on and believe you have it all figured out until you don't. That's fine. And if I'm right, okay. If he's right, okay. Pick your people. If you don't want to use facts and evidence and objective data to understand how the world works, and you want to go by intuition and gut and cult of personality and persuasion, then pick the people you agree with and live in those camps. But at least have the common decency to leave the people who are focused on things that are empirical and following the peer review process alone. Because we don't listen to you. It's not about persuading you. I don't care if you like the laws of physics as they are. I don't care about your preferences for gravity or your belief in chemistry. And somehow if you believe that the poison's not poison, it won't be poison. I really don't care. And the laws of physics don't care about you. Science doesn't care about you. Facts are facts. Truth is truth. There are absolutes in the world. And perhaps in a world of unlimited genders and crazy politicization of science, maybe we've started bending that a little bit, but reality bends back and has a way of reminding you from time to time that things are what they are. And what we do as a project is we take a step back and we say, what are first principles? And we put a flag in the ground and we say, this is what we're doing. These are our goals. We go do it. We prove it to people who aren't in our project. They're outside of our project through the peer review process in a formal, structured way. And only after they've said that they agree with it, or at least it's a legitimate thing, do we even consider bringing that idea into our product when we're talking about a serious protocol. Because this is people's money. This is people's privacy. This is people's identity. It's their product. If you want to follow a different philosophy of some engineers got together over pizza and they thought about it really hard, and they think they got a good idea, and boy, they're going to be amazing, then you go follow that philosophy, and maybe you get lucky. Maybe you get right. Okay, great. You won the lottery. Congratulations. But if you want to follow a structured philosophy, this is what you get. And if it's Charles Hoskinson doing it, if it's Sylvia Macaulay doing it, if it's Elie von Sassen doing it at Starkware, it does not matter. It's the same. You're drinking from the same well. If you don't like that well, go to a different well. You're not welcome. Marius, it has nothing to do with ego here. It really doesn't. It has to do with philosophy, and it has to do with values. And we have to not be afraid as a community to set a flag in the ground and fight the good fight. We are not in this organization, in this movement, arguing for we're better than Ethereum. We are arguing the merits of this project on its own foundations. And we are saying who we are. We are saying this is the way we're going to do it. It's the Paul Halmos way of doing things. Tell them what you're going to do it, and tell them what you did. That's what we've been doing since the beginning. And every opportunity we have to point out explicitly that this is the case, we do it. It's not about fighting trolls. It's about burning into the brains of everybody who evaluates this project who we are. When we get criticized, we often get criticized by people who have different values. The price didn't go up, so you're a scam. This other project says X, Y, and Z, and it seems to be better on the ticket than you. And we say, well, did they validate it? And they say, no. We say, well, then that's why we don't say those things. We could say crazy things. I could wake up tomorrow and make press and tweet, Hydra has 1 billion transactions per second. I could do that. And there would be a Cointelegraph article and all this other things. And it'd be all this hype. It wouldn't be real because it'd be asterisks. There would be a disclaimer. And when you actually try to implement it, you wouldn't get that performance. And we wrote blog posts explicitly explaining that this is a bad metric to think about these systems as. If the only decision metric you have is that vanity metric because you don't understand anything else, then when our competitor says they have 1 billion or 1 million or some number that's larger than ours, you say, they are better. Be them. Why aren't you them? You're inferior to them. And you're like, well, guys, you don't understand the game we're playing here. So it's not about ego. It's about saying this over and over again and defending the process. It is sacred. The process has to survive. It is the only way we're going to dig our ways out of the technical and scientific debt that we have. Every single protocol, bar none, today in market cannot scale to 1 billion users. That's just a fact. Anybody who tells you otherwise is Craig Wright. They're lying to you. They are pathological liars or they're idiots. They don't understand what they're doing. This is where we're at. And the things that we would have to do as an industry to get to 1 billion users would require us to make trade-offs we as an industry are not willing to make. Mass centralization of the protocol to a collection of small actors, huge subsidies to certain people, special powers to special people, all kinds of things that would add enormous amounts of fragility to the system and basically trade Google 1 for Google 2. That's where we're at. The point of the process we've been following with Cardano is to use science to create a different path. So you can get to 1 billion users, but you don't have to have those insane trade-offs. You can create a decentralized system that's still functional and resilient and has all those principles that we've come to know and love with Bitcoin. Are we there yet? No. But the only way we're going to get there as an ecosystem, the whole thing, is through peer review. Why? Because the complexity of these protocols are beyond anything one human being can build. No human being alive can replicate the internet that we have today. Why? Because it's an emergent system that is the consequence of the labor of millions of people every day. Similarly, when you talk about protocols that will service the unique needs of 1 billion people, preserving very important principles like inclusive accountability and irreversibility and never throwing away data, all kinds of these things that are super draconian design restrictions and Byzantine resistance and dynamic and decentralized and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. No human being is smart enough or small team is smart enough to come up with a set of protocols to do that today. So how do you do it? You turn it into a collective problem for all the universities in the world and all the bright people of the world to understand and work on. Just like cancer is a collective problem, HIV is a collective problem, going to space is a collective problem. And if it's understandable and it's stated in a culturally neutral, agnostic, decidable way that people really get and they can hold on to, then anyone can work on that without permission. Any graduate student, any professor, any engineer, and there is a meritocratic standard. When you publish your paper, nobody knows who you are. Nobody knows your credentials. You could be a high school dropout. You could be Sylvia Macaulay, a Turing Medal winner, a Turing Award winner. Doesn't matter, the spectrum. All they see is the title of the paper, the abstract, and the body of work. And it goes through that same channel as everybody else. And if you follow the rules, you can do that. And the point of projects like Cardano is that we are turning on every university to this concept and getting people interested throughout their entire professional lives to figure out how to preserve the principles we care about, but at the same time scale the system to billions of people and not give up the trade-offs. Who is being egotistical and arrogant and dishonest are the people in our industry who say we're already there and we've already achieved this. They're lying to you, and they're lying to you to make money from you. They're leading you down the road to hell. They're saying they have things we know they don't have because the science isn't there. The engineering is not there. There's no demonstrated protocol. I remember when EOS was saying things, 500,000 transactions per second. Just napkin calculations would tell you how absurd that statement is. 1 kilobyte transactions, 500,000. That's what, 500 megabyte block? 500 megabytes every second in your network? What kind of internet connection can relay that? How do you propagate that through the entire system? There are no protocols to do that in a replicated system. None. Without massive centralization, massive control by a small group of actors. Is that a cryptocurrency then? But they made these statements and raised money on these statements. This is where our competitors are at. This is what these people are doing in the industry. So I get all these trolls that come in and they parrot what they've heard. And what we do is we fight them. And then they somehow they find out little by little, they lose certainty and they start realizing that the propaganda that they've been inculcated with is wrong, or they don't. And if they don't, they get pushed out. It's an immune system. And if they do, they have an awakening and they realize that they're being treated dishonestly by the space as a whole. And at the very least, here's what's going to happen. They lose faith when the project doesn't deliver. If you claim you can do X and you can't do X, there's only so long you can give people the Kool-Aid before they die or they leave. And then when they leave, then who do they go back to? They go back to the people who were honest with them in the beginning, who told them the difficult truths. You can't break the laws of physics. There's no free lunch. If you want to get rid of the trade-offs, you have to do new things. You can't just take old things, package them up, put a new name on it, put a new coat of paint on it, pretend like you've invented something. No. If you actually want to do it, there's no substitute for the hard work. And because it's a collective, enormous problem of a global scale, the only way you're going to solve that problem is making it accessible to as many people as possible and collectively solving the problem bit by bit, piece by piece. It's not sexy. We've written over 60 papers at IOHK, 60. That's a good academic career, 60 meaningful papers. We're the number one company in the world for citations in the cryptocurrency space. If you look at our citations objectively, just go to Google, look at the papers, look at the citation counts, add them together, compare them to our competitors. Are we done? No. We've laid the foundations, and there are years to decades of work to get us to that utopia that we want to get to of 1 billion people. But the thing I'm confident about is the process is right. It's not ego. It's just thinking in terms of the Rolling Stone effect, the avalanche effect. Once you've started this, it's irreversible. It's a good idea. Guys, we went from nobody to a project that donated money to a United States university, a state school, and got not only the university, but the state to match funds with our currency. And we did that in just a few years from launch. And that lab is going to produce enormous value for that university. It's going to train great graduate students and give them great careers. It's going to create jobs in the state of Wyoming. It's going to produce academic peer-reviewed papers. It's going to create real products that are going to authenticate watches and shoes and other things. And more importantly, it's a small brick in a bigger wall that we're constructing that legitimizes a university working with this protocol. And in a very short period of time, no one's going to come to me. They're going to go right to the Treasury system, the students groups and the professors, and say, I want to do research in the Cardano protocol. And they're going to treat Cardano like the NSF. And what does that mean? We've just opened up the welcome mat for millions of academics across the world, every country on an equal playing ground, to collaborate and participate and have ideas and bring new concepts to our ecosystem. How the hell is F2 better than that? They don't have any mechanism to facilitate this. It's basically whoever's leading that project, who's ever in the inner circle, is that's the extent of their mental capacity. And what we as a movement have done is created an inevitability that every university in the world can now participate and play in our sandbox. And all the future Einsteins, the future Fermis, the future Terry Taus, they can now look to us to fund their dreams and fund their research if it's relevant to our domain. And we get that forever. And there's no country that owns it. There's no intellectual property. There's no patents. It's yours as much mine. That's the system we've constructed, because that's what you get when you have principles. That's what you get when you tell people what you're going to do and you're honest about it and you do it. You might take more time to do it. You might find out that the road that you're on is shut down and you have to take a detour and go around, and it's a lot longer journey. But if you continue the discipline, the intellectual honesty, and most importantly, the process, you'll get there. And when you get there, you inspire other people to continue the journey with you. And those people, when they continue the journey with you time and again, what do? They bring new ideas, they bring new approaches, and inevitably they come up with that idea that cures the cancer, that idea that allows you to scale to 1 billion people and do it with the trade-offs that we as a community are willing to take. I will never tell you that this is an easy thing, a short-term thing. It is a philosophical thing, and it's a work thing. It's a discipline thing, and it's a process. And my job is to push the boulder down the hill. I had to push it all the way up to the top of the hill. We got it there, and we give just a little bit of a push. That first domino. That's why the tagline of IOHK is cascading disruption. This concept of a little bit of a push cascades and gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And 20 years from now, I will wake up and it's irreversible and inevitable. We have set the wheels in motion and we are there. And no one else has that. This is the core value proposition of Cardano. And it's why we get so passionate about these things. It's why we fight these things. It's why we call these trolls out. Because we're trying to make the point and put the flag in the ground and get people there. And I will never apologize for that, ever. If you don't like the style, okay. You don't have to like it. There are other people in this project. There's other ideas in this project. There's many other leaders in this project. I'm just one of many voices. And I have a particular style and a particular way of doing things. But no means does it have a monopoly on this project as a whole. And if you like a different style, find that person attached to them. But you have to be in love with the process. And if you're not, it's not for you. Go do something else. Listen to the sweet little lies of our competitors. Why did you name your company and put out in Hong Kong? Because we were in Hong Kong. How do you feel about buybacks? Don't even get me started with stock buybacks. Yet these companies, they have no integrity. They times they're good, they go and buy their stock back, make the shareholder price go up. And then the minute that a crisis happens, oh, we have no savings. We need a bailout or else we'll collapse. Please help us. Microsoft, one of the reasons why it succeeded was Bill Gates was a very conservative businessman. He had, in certain respects, he was very aggressive in other respects, but on the balance sheet, he was very conservative. They always had at least 1 to 2 years of resources on hand. Make no money at all. They still could pay all their people in the company for at least a year of burn rate, if not more. Why? Because they lived in an age when they invoiced people. It'd take a year for somebody to pay them if they ever got paid. So there was constant cash flow issues, and a strong balance sheet was what kept you alive. Anyway, today companies don't seem to get that concept. They're just like, we'll run it on overdrive, give all the value to the shareholders. The minute a crisis happens, because we're necessary for the economy, we have the covered by a bailout. That's the moral hazard of a bailout. It's used to call it the Greenspan put. Then it was the Bernanke helicopter cash, and now it's just like crazy, $6 trillion out of thin air. I don't really like it. You got to eventually let some of these companies go out of business. And if they don't go out of business, then, we get what we deserve. By the way, why do people hate Bill Gates so much? I'd hazard a guess. He's a fake person now, and what I mean by that is that there was the real Bill Gates during the 1990s and 80s and 60s, 70s and 60s. And he was a ruthless businessman, and he delighted in being a ruthless businessman. If you look at the interviews of him in the 90s, you had this guy who's like, I'm going to crush you. I'm just going to take joy in crushing you. And he had this little smile on his face, and everybody got that. They understood it. And he was the king of his jungle. And we as business people, we admired that. We said, wow, look how ruthless this businessman is. And look what he can accomplish. Look what he's built. He turned Microsoft into a $600 billion company. And now he's the savior of the world. And there's this cognitive disconnect between Bill Gates, the ruthless businessman, and Bill Gates, the savior of the world. And people have a hard time reconciling those two things. The body language doesn't match. You see a lot of duper's delight when he's talking. And he says we need to do X, but then you're always wondering, like, there's got to be more to this. A guy like this doesn't think this way. He thinks this other way. And this is why people see a fundamental lack of sincerity in Bill. I don't for a moment believe he's gotten rid of his competitive nature. You just can't. If you, I love deep thought on things because I was a mathematician. I remember one time I worked on a single math problem for 26 hours. I started at 2 a.m. I finished at 4 a.m. the following day. And I was like, oh, I've been working on this 2 hours. And I was like, oh shit, it's the next day. I should probably stop and like sleep or something. I don't know. I mean, there's some people that are just born certain ways and they have proclivities to certain things when they're fascinated with that. And if you're a ruthless businessman, you never give that up. You never give up that competitive edge. So then you go to the charity world and everything's slow and all this stuff. Nobody trusts that. They don't believe in that. So he says, oh, we should do X. What's the angle here? Like if he's investing in this country to save them, does he own some of the real estate there? I mean, there's always got to be some angle. Why is he giving all his money away, but his net wealth keeps increasing on the Forbes list? It's like, what's the story there? So it's a good case study where your actions and the things you say and do, they have to be consistent. They have to match each other. And when there's a mismatch, people don't trust you. Another great example of that's Mitt Romney. I know Mitt Romney. I met him a few times. And Mitt's a brilliant guy. MBA JD from Harvard, an incredibly good businessman, super, super good at business fundamentals. There are very few people I've ever met that you can just drop into a situation and they'd have a pretty good sense of how to fix a business. They just know the fundamentals like the back of their hand. And so Mitt, that guy, and Mitt, the family man, great. But then when he ran for office, it was just like you could put YouTube clips of what he said against Ted Kennedy to when he ran for president in 2016. Totally different people, same guy. And so you're just thinking, how could you have such divergence and say things that you don't believe? Especially because you argued the opposite thing at some point. So people knew that lack of sincerity there. and they could smell it and they could taste it. And despite the fact that you have this hyper competent guy who's clearly very successful, nobody trusts him because there's a mismatch there. And I think there's somehow a nonverbal mismatch, the way that Gates presents things and does things. And there's a stylistic mismatch where he wants to rule by consensus, but he still has that Microsoft mentality of dominance, and it leaks into the efforts. It leaks into the things that they do. And it's a great tragedy because at the end of the day, there are a lot of incredibly good things that happen. We run into those efforts going throughout Africa, and we've seen the good things that have happened. And yet over the internet, it's just like you'd read this guy's like a depopulationist, globalist, genocidal maniac that wants to kill a third of the world population or something. Meanwhile, we go to Africa and we understand the problems they're working on. Simple things like, how do you get vaccines that don't need to be refrigerated? How do you get a better toilet? Because millions of people die from poor sanitation. How do you get nets for mosquitoes so people don't die of malaria? Little things. And hundreds of missteps and, trying their best. And there's very good people that work with them. And we rub shoulders with people who used to work at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on various projects. And there's thorough professionals and very competent, and they love what they do. And they firmly believe in the mission, and they want to help people. There's not a bad bone in their body ever. So despite the fact that he can't seem to broadcast sincerity, he does seem to have the ability to attract some of the brightest people in the world to do great things. And you just judge things on a case-by-case basis, and you see how things come. I just think it's a bad idea to pretend to be what you're not. If you're the world's richest man, you can't pretend to be poor. If you're the world's richest man, you can't pretend to be relatable. The guy is a genius, and the guy is unique. And there are very few people you'll ever meet in your life who are as talented, capable, and just absolutely to the right of the curve as a guy like Bill Gates. So he shouldn't, in my view, pretend not to be that guy. Steve Jobs never did, and other people in that order never did. They knew who they were, and they said, let's just instead focus on the magic of what we're doing and why what we're doing is great, instead of trying to be relatable.